Settle in. We begin with a line almost everyone knows: the Great Wall. Stone steps on windy ridges, low beacon towers, caravan gates in the passes. It will appear now and then at the edge of our path, a quiet thread of attention. While we walk gently through centuries of China, courtyards with lanterns and well stones, boats along the Grand Canal, tea lifting a soft steam, silk drawn to thread, paper taking ink, abacus beads whispering numbers. Well, stay with hands and tools, clay lamps, tidy knots, measuring cups, bamboo brushes, bells that keep time without hurry. If you drift, the story will keep your place where water learns its path, paper keeps its promise, and the wall to the north rests as a calm reminder to pay attention. The first part. Courtyards wake before streets, and streets wake before walls. In the blue hour, a courtyard understands its work. Sweepings gathered into a tidy cone, a clay lamp trimmed so the wick will not argue, the well rope coiled so it will pay out like a sentence that knows where it is going. A broom leans against a lime-washed wall, its bristles remembering yesterday's dust without needing to mention it. Beside the threshold, a basin waits with quiet water, not to announce purity, only to offer it. From a peg on the lintel hangs a key ring the size of a tea saucer, iron softened by palms, a small circle that decides when morning becomes public. The well stone keeps its own ceremony. A wooden lid slides back. A bucket, banded in iron, descends with a hum of string welcoming a bow. The rope runs over a wheel whose groove is darker than the wheel itself. Oil lives in that groove, and the wheel is grateful. When the bucket kisses water, the sound is both a proof and a permission. A second sound rises, drops tapping the shaft's cool bricks. The bucket returns without splashing, steadied by a hand that has learned many small mercies. The first ladle goes to the teapot, the second to the hand basin, the third to the stone by the potted bamboo where roots keep a ledger of mornings. Across the river, the city learns its letters. Shop shutters roll up to the height of a careful smile. Awnings unroll like sentences that prefer the shade. Abacus beads cross their rails in 2s and 3s, not because there is urgency, but because numbers like to stretch before they begin. On a corner, a brush mender lays out sleeves of bamboo, hair of goat, hair of wolf, tiny strings for farrels. He ties knots that open, knots that wait, and one signature, a knot that notices when a hand grows tired and loosens itself. A young scribe brings an inkstone with a shallow lake, a stick of soot, a coil of paper that sits with a round patience. He grinds water and soot until the surface is the color of a deep breath. He presses the brush into that breath and writes the morning into shape. The tea house opens its doors, not by pushing, but by letting the street breathe through. Inside, steam remembers mountains. A kettle shoulders a lid that chatters like a street vendor when it is ready and falls silent when it finds the right simmer. Leaves open at their own pace, not by command. Oolong unwinds like a road. Green lifts like a shade cloth. Cups warm on a tray that was once a plank in a boat and still bears the faint memory of the canal in its grain. A measure spoon moves the same way each time a wrist turns with the confidence that repetition gives. The first pour wakes the clay itself, the second belongs to the room, the third goes to the guest who arrived with a list and forgot to carry it in. From the back window, the Great Wall is not a dragon, not a sentence shouted across hills. It is a pale stitch on far ridges, a boundary of attention. Beacon towers sit like punctuation that learned restraint. A cart path trails the foothills where, long ago, a courier might have counted posts and nodded to a gate that knew his seal. Today, the path carries shepherds and a mule with salt into baskets. The wall keeps its long habit, not spectacle, but steady notice. Knowing it exists makes the valley stand a little straighter. The way a ring on a door makes a knock remember its manners. The canal speaks in locked gates and near silent undertows. A boat approaches a chamber with 2 stair-step doors. The keeper lifts a beam. The gate nose is open, and water thinks in inches. A floatboard rises, its edge carries marks that are not numbers, but promises when the line reaches this notch. Spread your oars when it reaches that one. Coil your rope. A boy runs along the bank with a hook to catch the boat's ring. He does not shout. He places the hook under the iron and walks backward, letting the rope learn the load. In the chamber the boat settles, low to high, high to low, by a rhythm that could be hummed. The keeper closes the upper gate by laying his weight into the pole, not by winning against it. When water agrees, the downstream doors welcome the boat into its next sentence. On terraces up country, rice fields keep a calendar made of edges and angles. Dikes wear grass like a modest hat. A spillway stands 1 finger higher than the field, and water accepts the lesson. A boy lifts a wooden plug, a girl lays a stone back on a spill, a grandfather checks the line of a level board, whose bubble is no glass at all, only a floating reed imprisoned between 2 pegs on a plank. Where the reed pauses, the field knows it has remembered today's horizon. Water walks from terrace to terrace without tripping. Ducks practice their small patrols, turning weeds into breakfast and breakfast into patience. A bell in a distant village rings so slowly that the sound lands like a leaf. In a silk yard, cocoons sit in baskets that have learned to be gentle. A pot warms to a simmer that persuades, not coerces. A woman tests the surface with a twig and finds the filaments that want to rise. She gathers 3, then 5, then 7, and guides them through a ring smoothed by 1,000 mornings. On the reel the thread lays itself in diagonal lines that correct each other. Beside her, a child counts not by numbers, but by the feel of tension in the fingers. When the reel creaks, oil says here. When the thread whispers, the hand says there. In the quiet court the work is not fragile, it is exact. Porcelain is earth that learned to remember fire. In the kill yard, wedging tables teach clay to come to an agreement with itself. A potter throws a bowl, whose lip will later rest beneath the weight of a lid, as if lid and bowl had decided trust was economical. Glaze sits in a tub the color of moonlit milk. A taster shaves a strip from a test tile, writes a mark that is not a letter, and stabs the tile into the body of the kill. The kill is built like a road up a hill, one chamber after another, the draft traveling from firebox to exit, like a messenger who visits each room to take its temperature. Pine logs arrive in a stack that is a ration, not a boast. Through the spy hole the glaze becomes transparent enough to reflect a ghost of the fire. When the potter sees that ghost, she closes the damper and rests her hand on the kin's warm skin, thanking it without words. In the counting court, scales hang from a beam that knows its duty. Weights are brass and round, some older than the market itself. Each has a nick that fingers recognize the way city dogs recognize doorways. A clerk on a high stool tallies with bamboo slips that click softly when they meet. His abacus is no instrument of triumph. It is a straight path through sums. He flicks beads, pauses for a heartbeat after each group, then lays 1 slip flat and another across it to say done. When a merchant's throat turns dry, someone tips water from a clay jar, and the newspaper of the afternoon no ink, only talk resumes. Paper was once bark, but now it is promise. In a mill by a stream, a vat holds a thin cloud of fibers. A frame and screen descend, rise, and bring with them a sheet that is not yet itself. The vat tender's hands move in a pattern so old that his wrists anticipate before eyes confirm. A couching table receives the wet sheets, and a felt blanket encourages them to share the load. Weight and time perform their quiet arithmetic. Pressure at noon, drying by evening, stacking tomorrow, trimming when the moon is a white coin near the roof. A stamp pressed into a corner says not mine, but ready. At noon in a gatehouse, the watch shares rice and the story about weather that everyone has heard and wants to hear again. Their desk holds seals, a small rectangle of soapstone, a string of cords, a brush, a wafer of cinnabar paste. A traveller offers a pass. The watchman dampens the paste with a patient drop of water, presses the seal, and adds a marking brush that agrees with the seal without imitating it. The pass smells faintly of paste, faintly of travel, mostly of intention. Outside the gate, the road bends to avoid old trees. Far off, the Great Wall keeps its shade even at midday. Travellers glance north, not out of fear, but out of the habit of living with a horizon that has a thought. In a monastery garden, gravel teaches footsteps to be present. Water crosses a stone lip and falls into a basin that knows how to welcome without argument. A novice trims a wick in a clay lamp and wipes the soot from the rim with the corner of his sleeve. A small courtesy that lamp and sleeve both understand. Bells later will call time that already knows itself, for now a broom moves gravel into a pattern that expresses the idea of water without waking it. In the library, a book waits under a paper weight shaped like a mountain. The weight is smooth from use. Under it lies a page that will remember a name longer than anyone will pronounce it. Toward evening, a wind on the northern hills learns to be polite. The wall stones hold the day's heat and release it in a breath that shepherds can read. Beacon towers do not speak, they keep the idea of speaking. On the city's roofs, lanterns appear one by one, not to conquer darkness, only to organize it. Door rings welcome chords that are tied in loose bows, because tonight there is no need to insist. The canal shows two small windows of a ferry moving like an idea toward a key ring that has known both storm and lull. A boatman's pole taps the stone with the gentlest argument a pole can make and still be heard. Night writing is different ink. A scribe sits at a table as wide as 2 shoulders and as deep as 3 thoughts. He places the lamp behind his hand so the shadow of his own fingers does not interrupt the page. He lays out paperweights shaped like clouds, pins a brush rest with a pebble, and starts a list that will let morning proceed at its preferred pace. Not orders, remembrances, coil rope, air drying screen, thank old Lynn for the hinge pin. Ask waterkeeper to look at the floatboard. Replace the blue ribbon on barley water jars. Whisper to kill to sleep well. He smiles at that last line, but does not erase it. If sleep arrives, let it. Doors will keep their rings, easy wells will keep their rope from snarling tea, will keep its steam beads, will keep their lane silk, will keep its even draw glaze, will keep its ghost locks, will keep their inching face terraces, will keep their level paper, will keep its corner stamp bells, will keep the hour without waking it. The wall will keep the ridge, the way a seam keeps a garment felt when you reach for it, quiet when you don't. The city will keep your place between bucket and cup, between brush and page, between ring and cord and the simple knot that opens when you ask. Pocket pictures to carry forward. A bucket's first kiss on a well's dark water, an abacus bead pausing like a planet at opposition, a tea tray's damp circle, where a cup rested a moment along a reel of silk shadowed with diagonal. Patience a kill spy hole, with a star of heat, around it a floatboard with notches that mean nearly a paper sheet rolling free of its screen like a lake learning to be a mirror, a gate seal leaving a red square the size of a quiet decision, a gravel ripple kept in place by a broom that knows direction, a lantern lit from a lamp that never once raised its voice. If sleep arrives, let it. The road will still be swept in the morning, the canal will still be inching boats upward, and down the terrace will still accept the measure of a reed. The kill will still imagine the shape of fire, the bell will still be the right size for the hour, the wall will still be visible where the ridge remembers to rise, and the list on the scribe's table will still wait for hands that prefer regular work to heroic hurry. The second part. Courtyards wake before streets, and streets wake before walls. In the blue hour a courtyard understands its work. Sweepings gathered into a tidy cone, a clay lamp trimmed so the wick will not argue, the well rope coiled so it will pay out like a sentence that knows where it is going. A broom leans against a lime-washed wall, its bristles remembering yesterday's dust without needing to mention it. Beside the threshold a basin waits with quiet water, not to announce purity, only to offer it. From a peg on the lintel hangs a key ring the size of a tea saucer, iron softened by palms, a small circle that decides when morning becomes public. The well stone keeps its own ceremony. A wooden lid slides back. A bucket, banded in iron, descends with a hum of string welcoming a bow. The rope runs over a wheel whose groove is darker than the wheel itself. Oil lives in that groove, and the wheel is grateful. When the bucket kisses water, the sound is both a proof and a permission. A second sound rises, drops tapping the shaft's cool bricks. The bucket returns without splashing, steadied by a hand that has learned many small mercies. The first ladle goes to the teapot, the second to the hand basin, the third to the stone by the potted bamboo where roots keep a ledger of mornings. Across the river, the city learns its letters. Shop shutters roll up to the height of a careful smile. Awnings unroll like sentences that prefer the shade. Abacus beads cross their rails in 2s and 3s, not because there is urgency, but because numbers like to stretch before they begin. On a corner, a brush mender lays out sleeves of bamboo, hair of goat, hair of wolf, tiny strings for farrels. He ties knots that open, knots that wait, and one signature, a knot that notices when a hand grows tired and loosens itself. A young scribe brings an inkstone with a shallow lake, a stick of soot, a coil of paper that sits with a round patience. He grinds water and soot until the surface is the color of a deep breath. He presses the brush into that breath and writes the morning into shape. The tea house opens its doors, not by pushing, but by letting the street breathe through. Inside, steam remembers mountains. A kettle shoulders a lid that chatters like a street vendor when it is ready and falls silent when it finds the right simmer. Leaves open at their own pace, not by command. Oolong unwinds like a road. Green lifts like a shadecloth. Cups warm on a tray that was once a plank in a boat, and still bears the faint memory of the canal in its grain. A measure spoon moves the same way each time a wrist turns with the confidence that repetition gives. The first pour wakes the clay itself, the second belongs to the room, the third goes to the guest who arrived with a list and forgot to carry it in. From the back window, the Great Wall is not a dragon, not a sentence shouted across hills. It is a pale stitch on far ridges, a boundary of attention. Beacon towers sit like punctuation that learned restraint. A cart path trails the foothills where, long ago, a courier might have counted posts and nodded to a gate that knew his seal. Today, the path carries shepherds and a mule with salt into baskets. The wall keeps its long habit, not spectacle, but steady notice. Knowing it exists makes the valley stand a little straighter. The way a ring on a door makes a knock remember its manners. The canal speaks in locked gates and near silent undertows. A boat approaches a chamber with 2 stair-step doors. The keeper lifts a beam. The gate nose is open, and water thinks in inches. A floatboard rises, its edge carries marks that are not numbers, but promises when the line reaches its notch. Spread your oars when it reaches that one. Coil your rope. A boy runs along the bank with a hook to catch the boat's ring. He does not shout. He places the hook under the iron and walks backward, letting the rope learn the load. In the chamber the boat settles, low to high, high to low, by a rhythm that could be hummed. The keeper closes the upper gate by laying his weight into the pole, not by winning against it. When water agrees, the downstream doors welcome the boat into its next sentence. On terraces up country, rice fields keep a calendar made of edges and angles. Dikes wear grass like a modest hat. A spillway stands 1 finger higher than the field, and water accepts the lesson. A boy lifts a wooden plug, a girl lays a stone back on a spill, a grandfather checks the line of a level board, whose bubble is no glass at all, only a floating reed imprisoned between 2 pegs on a plank. Where the reed pauses, the field knows it has remembered today's horizon. Water walks from terrace to terrace without tripping. Ducks practice their small patrols, turning weeds into breakfast and breakfast into patience. A bell in a distant village rings so slowly that the sound lands like a leaf. In a silk yard, cocoons sit in baskets that have learned to be gentle. A pot warms to a simmer that persuades, not coerces. A woman tests the surface with a twig and finds the filaments that want to rise. She gathers 3, then 5, then 7, and guides them through a ring smoothed by 1,000 mornings. On the reel the thread lays itself in diagonal lines that correct each other. Beside her, a child counts not by numbers, but by the feel of tension in the fingers. When the reel creaks, oil says here. When the thread whispers, the hand says there. In the quiet court the work is not fragile, it is exact. Porcelain is earth that learned to remember fire. In the kill yard, wedging tables teach clay to come to an agreement with itself. A potter throws a bowl whose lip will later rest beneath the weight of a lid, as if lid and bowl had decided trust was economical. Glaze sits in a tub the color of moonlit milk. A taster shaves a strip from a test tile, writes a mark that is not a letter, and stabs the tile into the body of the kill. The kill is built like a road up a hill, one chamber after another, the draft traveling from firebox to exit, like a messenger who visits each room to take its temperature. Pine logs arrive in a stack that is a ration, not a boast. Through the spy hole the glaze becomes transparent enough to reflect a ghost of the fire. When the potter sees that ghost, she closes the damper and rests her hand on the kin's warm skin, thanking it without words. In the counting court, scales hang from a beam that knows its duty. Weights are brass and round, some older than the market itself. Each has a nick that fingers recognize the way city dogs recognize doorways. A clerk on a high stool tallies with bamboo slips that click softly when they meet. His abacus is no instrument of triumph. It is a straight path through sums. He flicks beads, pauses for a heartbeat after each group, then lays one slip flat and another across it to say done. When a merchant's throat turns dry, someone tips water from a clay jar, and the newspaper of the afternoon no ink, only talk resumes. Paper was once bark, but now it is promise. In a mill by a stream, a vat holds a thin cloud of fibers. A frame and screen descend, rise, and bring with them a sheet that is not yet itself. The vat tender's hands move in a pattern so old that his wrists anticipate before eyes confirm. A couching table receives the wet sheets, and a felt blanket encourages them to share the load. Weight and time perform their quiet arithmetic. Pressure at noon, drying by evening, stacking tomorrow, trimming when the moon is a white coin near the roof. A stamp pressed into a corner says not mine, but ready. At noon in a gatehouse, the watch shares rice and a story about weather that everyone has heard and wants to hear again. Their desk holds seals, a small rectangle of soapstone, a string of cords, a brush, a wafer of cinnabar paste. A traveller offers a pass. The watchman dampens the paste with a patient drop of water, presses the seal, and adds a marking brush that agrees with the seal without imitating it. The pass smells faintly of paste, faintly of travel, mostly of intention. Outside the gate, the road bends to avoid old trees. Far off, the Great Wall keeps its shade even at midday. Travellers glance north, not out of fear, but out of the habit of living with a horizon that has a thought. In a monastery garden, gravel teaches footsteps to be present. Water crosses a stone lip and falls into a basin that knows how to welcome without argument. A novice trims a wick in a clay lamp and wipes the soot from the rim with the corner of his sleeve. A small courtesy that lamp and sleeve both understand. Bells later will call time that already knows itself. For now a broom moves gravel into a pattern that expresses the idea of water without waking it. In the library a book waits under a paper weight shaped like a mountain. The weight is smooth from use. Under it lies a page that will remember a name longer than anyone will pronounce it. Toward evening, a wind on the northern hills learns to be polite. The wall stones hold the day's heat and release it in a breath that shepherds can read. Beacon towers do not speak, they keep the idea of speaking. On the city's roofs, lanterns appear one by one, not to conquer darkness, only to organize it. Door rings welcome cords that are tied in loose bows, because tonight there is no need to insist. The canal shows two small windows of a ferry moving like an idea toward a key ring that has known both storm and lull. A boatman's pole taps the stone with the gentlest argument a pole can make and still be heard. Night writing is different ink. A scribe sits at a table as wide as to shoulders and as deep as 3 thoughts. He places the lamp behind his hand so the shadow of his own fingers does not interrupt the page. He lays out paper weights shaped like clouds, pins a brush rest with a pebble, and starts a list that will let morning proceed at its preferred pace. Not orders, remembrances, coil rope, air drying screen, thank old Lynn for the hinge pin. Ask waterkeeper to look at the floatboard, replace the blue ribbon on barley water jars, whisper to Kill to sleep well. He smiles at that last line, but does not erase it. If sleep arrives, let it. Doors will keep their rings, easy wells will keep their rope from snarling tea, will keep its steam beads, will keep their lane silk, will keep its even draw glaze, will keep its ghost locks, will keep their inching face terraces, will keep their level paper, will keep its corner stamp bells, will keep the hour without waking it. The wall will keep the ridge, the way a seam keeps a garment felt when you reach for it, quiet when you don't. The city will keep your place between bucket and cup, between brush and page, between ring and cord, and the simple knot that opens when you ask. Pocket pictures to carry forward. A bucket's first kiss on a well's dark water, an abacus bead pausing like a planet at opposition, a tea tray's damp circle, where a cup rested a moment to long a reel of silk shadowed with diagonal. Patience a kill spy hole, with a star of heat, around it a float board with notches, that mean nearly a paper sheet rolling free of its screen like a lake learning to be a mirror, a gate seal leaving a red square the size of a quiet decision, a gravel ripple kept in place by a broom that knows direction, a lantern lit from a lamp that never once raised its voice. If sleep arrives, let it. The road will still be swept in the morning, the canal will still be inching boats upward, and down the terrace will still accept the measure of a reed. The kill will still imagine the shape of fire, the bell will still be the right size for the hour, the wall will still be visible where the ridge remembers to rise, and the list on the scribe's table will still wait for hands that prefer regular work to heroic hurry. The third part. Ink is patient when you give it a stone. In a scholar's room, a slab of slate holds a shallow lake, a stick of soot leans at its edge like a guest who knows the house. Water meets soot in soft circles. The brush drinks from that meeting, lifts, and lets the first stroke find paper that was made yesterday and trimmed this morning. The desk is plain. To cloud-shaped weights keep the sheet from remembering its curl. A thread hangs from the lamp as a quiet plum. When the brush stops, the thread does not swing. That is the measure of a good line. Across the lane, a block carver sits at a bench with pearwood under his hands. The board is planed to evenness and pinned at its corners with pegs, so it will not wander when the knife begins to speak. He has reversed the world. Letters and little pictures lie backward in charcoal, their future hidden in the decision to carve the space around them rather than the letters themselves. Knives rest in a roll of linen, V-gouged thin as a whisper, U-gouge for clearing fields, flat chisel for the stubborn strokes. He breathes on the blade before it touches wood, perhaps for luck, perhaps so the wood will remember that breath when it must let go. When the last tail of a stroke is cut, he tests the block with a thin paper and a dry rubbing. Ghost letters appear, pale as the idea of morning. He looks for burrs, finds 3, teases them away with the tip of a blade. He rubs a trace of oil into the face, so ink will not flood the little valleys. In a corner he carves a tiny notch registration, a promise between wood and paper that they will meet at the same address tomorrow. Beside the block he places 2 slips of bamboo with holes. Pegs will pass through those holes to keep the paper honest. Promises need furniture. Printing is a friendly conspiracy. 1 person inks, 1 places, 1 rubs, 1 lifts. On the inker's pad, paste the colour of a distant storm under a sheet of mulberry paper, beaten into softness. Ink rises through the fibres when invited, not shoved. The inker touch walks the pad across the block until every stroke looks a little wet, not glistening, not starved. The placer slides a sheet against the pegs, lowers it into the faint tack of ink, and smooths it with the back of the hand. The rubber woman with wrists like good bamboo circles a pad over the sheet, finding corners first, then the belly of the page, then the stubborn heel, where wood always asks for a second thought. She hears the sound that means enough. The lifter takes a corner, breathes out, and peels. Letters arrive, clear, modest, ready to be read by someone who will be asleep by the time this page, dry, finds them. Lines of fresh sheets climb a rope on the far wall. The rope knots once every arm's length so a tired hand can count without looking. Sheets clip with bamboo pins that are spring without springs. A boy adds a sleeve of netting to the window so air can help without inviting flies that dream of ink. The room smells of paste, of wood warmed by fingers, of paper, that has not yet learned to be a surface for other people's thoughts. Outside, the lane smells of lunch. A bell in the distance tells an hour that everyone already knew. Bells do not teach time, they congratulate it. The finished stack moves to a long table, where a binder sleeps the edges with a knife pared to obedience. Covers weight, thin boards, a jacket of paper that remembers the grain, a title slip left blank for a hand that will not hurry. Thread is dyed with tea to the color of patience. Holes are punched through a line that will become a spine. The needle visits each hole twice, tying a knot that opens if asked the right question, stays if left to its work. A small stamp kisses the corner, not an owner's shout. A custodian's nod. Down the street, a stall lays out sheets the price of a handful of rice. Almanacs. Channel levels drawn like stair steps that are not a ladder but a song. Market days that avoid each other's appetite. Good hours for plantings, better hours for beginning a roof, least suitable hours for arguing with friends. The scribe at the store can explain each little sign with a finger and a smile. He keeps a scarf over the sheet that shows funeral days, not to hide them, to say that even in a world of calendars, kindness is part of the schedule. In a temple library, a chest holds blocks wrapped in paper, the color of old tea. Each block is tagged not with words, but with small pictures: bridge, bell, river bend, and a number of tiny holes along the edge that fingers can read in the dark. The librarian lifts one block, nods at the notch in the corner, and sets it back. He oils the hinges of the chest with a drop of sesame and shuts the lid gently, because wood remembers manners if people do. Outside, raked gravel accepts the shadow of a pine that refuses to be dramatic. Movable type is a rumor in this neighborhood and a fact in the next province. A visitor once brought a tray of little earthen rectangles with backward characters and set them like seeds in a frame. The print was good. The time was slow. The tray returned home with more respect than promise. Here, blocks hold their ground. When a page changes, a new board learns the song. In a corner, a carver keeps a box of tiny plugs for mistakes. He will carry his box to old age and never empty it. That is not failure. That is continuity. Maps are printed too. A fresh block shows the road north as a line that hesitates at rivers and grows steady across plains. Tiny squares mark posts where fresh horses wait. Little teeth mark passes. On the ridge line, a dotted lung of wall, if not drawn as a boast, only as a seam that hints. Here the land pays more attention to the sky. In the lower corner, two rings are carved. A cord will pass through them when the map is folded and hung by a desk. A map is a door. Doors want rings. At dusk, the brush returns to its rest. The inkstone drinks a last finger of water and is wiped with the respect due to a tool that turns intention into shape. Paperweights climb back into their box. The lamp's thread is wound around its base twice, not tightly, not loose. On the windowsill, a rectangle of proof sheets lies under a stone that looks like a mountain that thinks low thoughts. The mountain's job is to keep wind from practicing calligraphy. Night gathers. Somewhere on the northern ridge, the Great Wall listens to itself calling into the idea of stone. Beacon towers hold the outline of a conversation they have not had in years. In the city, readers sit with a page on their knees and let the day sort itself into lines. Their breathing and the breathing of the room agree. No one is hurried to the end. The end can wait. The page is in no danger of running away. If sleep arrives, let it. Knives will keep their keen courtesy blocks, will keep their backward wisdom inkstones, will keep their patient lake brushes, will keep their quiet thirst cords, will keep their knots that open pegs, will keep their promise to find. The same corner tomorrow bells will keep the hour without making an argument of it. Threads will keep the spine without insisting on being seen. The wall will keep the horizon. The horizon will keep the page. The page will keep your place. Pocket pictures to carry. A reverse character shining wet on perwood, a registration notch, the smallest smile, a bamboo peg finding its hole with no fuss, a rubbing pad circling the belly of a sheet, a drying rope marked with simple knots, a tea-dyed thread disappearing into a spine, a little soapstone sealing a square of red that says, gently, Ready, an almanac stair-step waterlines a map corner with two carved rings waiting for cord, a mountain-shaped wait except in the evening. If sleep arrives, let it. The ink will not thicken in resentment. The paper will not forget you. The block will wait face down, warm with the day's small courage, ready for another morning of making thoughts into objects that behave. The fourth part. Time in a city prefers instruments to speeches. At dawn, the bell tower checks its voice against the air. Bronze has its own weather. It holds yesterday's warmth in its ribs and lends it to a note that begins rounded and lands without edges. The keeper palms the clapper as if greeting a friend, lifts, and lets the first hour speak in a low syllable that remembers mountains. Across the square, the drum tower answers with skin and wood, not loud, only enough to invite feet to agree on a morning. Between them, shutters open at a pace that suits both. In the bell yard, sizes keep the calendar. The smallest bell minds the quarter hours with a tone that behaves like a pebbled stream. The middle bell likes mid-morning and the time when tea is the answer to questions that do not need words. The big bell belongs to evening, to the moment when lamps ask to be lit and doors think about rings. A paper slip at the keeper's table records what is already in his hands. A row of ink dots, not numbers, and a little sketch of a clapper with a loop more reminder of touch than of time. A cord hangs by the bench, not tied tight, not loose, ready to bind a wrap when skins swell in rain. Tools are what make repetition a kindness. Behind the tower, the water clock works in sentences. A bronze bowl becomes a sky in a tub. A slender stream falls through a pinhole to a pot that rises under a float. The float carries a board with a feather's patience. Along its edge, notches wait like small courtesies, almost, half, nearly, now. The keeper does not stare. He rests his palm on the tub's rim until call reminds him that haste is not welcome here. When the board reaches its shy notch, he notes a dot on a strip of paper and adds a clean pebble to a bowl. Pebbles are easier to trust in dim light. A bowl that fills tells the time even when no one looks. That is the clock's secret. It keeps a second story for when eyes are occupied elsewhere. Farther along the corridor, incense keeps its own grammar. Sticks marked with little metal bells sleep on their tray. Coils, pressed in a mold with a pinhole that turns circles into hours, wait in a covered jar. A lay clerk pinches a thread of ash between thumb and forefinger and smiles. Good ash falls like a polite sentence. He sets a new stick on a bronze rest, shaped like a crane's foot, and touches a coal to its tip. In 3 rooms of the city, a similar stick will be doing the same, and people who never met will agree about when to fold cloth, when to open a ledger, when to stop arguing and share boiled water. Time, when it chooses simple tools, makes neighbors out of strangers. A rope of hours connects towers to kitchens. In a kitchen courtyard, a woman counts dumplings, not by hunger, but by the bell and the shadow on the flagstones. Her ladle pauses when the middle bell remembers itself. Her hand lifts, skims, and returns a dumpling for a moment more, because patience makes the mouth feel welcome. She wipes the ladle on the cloth hanging from the door ring, a loop tied in a bow so a child can untie it without learning a knot before breakfast. A jar of soy shines where a slant of light finds its shoulder. The jar does not hurry to be useful, it knows its turn. On the northern road, a watch station keeps hours that belong to feet. A wooden gong rests on a frame. Sand runs through a glass the size of a thumb. A split reed, bitten by a notch, ticks with the breeze. The captain marks the changing of the watch by tapping the gong softly, 1, 2, 3, and then lays the mallet aside. In the distance, the great wall holds its seam against the sky. Beacon towers make short shadows even at noon, as if they were gentle sundials that chose to measure vastness with modesty. A courier passes, raises 2 fingers in greeting, and goes on, his pass warm from his sleeve. The station's desk holds a brush and a pot, and a little cake of paste left open to breathe. Time is an exchange. When you make a mark, it gives you something back. In the canal quarter, a lock keeper keeps a reed by his ledger. He floats it in a pan when the day turns damp. If the reed lies too low, he lowers the sluice slower. because water becomes temper when air grows heavy. A ferryman trims his lamp wick under the second bell, the wick's edge learns to sit even, and the flame becomes a polite coin of light. A fisherman ties his line to a ring and counts a slow 10 between casts, not because fish like understanding, but because he does. The drum in the tower gives him a quiet shoulder to lean on across the water. In a scholar's courtyard, a gnomon stands a simple rod set in a square of stone. Its shadow tastes autumn in the morning and spring in the afternoon. A novice lays a string from the rod's foot to a mark and learns that not all answers scream some nod. He records the nod with a dot of ink and draws a line across the top of a page so that tomorrow's dot will have a place to stand. The page looks up at him and waits. Pages are patient animals. They come when called and rest when dismissed. Monks keep a night office that does not wake the city. A bell the size of a pear lives by the door. Its note is soft enough to ask the moon's permission. They chant with the calm of men who have replaced velocity with habit. In their garden a water basin fills grain by grain from a bamboo spout that tips at a certain weight and returns. The spout's clack is small and infrequent, a punctuation no sentence would object to. Once each hour, a lantern is moved one hook farther along a corridor. Whoever finds it knows the hour without thinking about it. If a traveller sleeps in the guest cell, the lantern's progress is the kindest clock he will ever meet. Markets measure themselves in drums and footsteps. A man with a tray of pears learns to arrive when the third drum welcomes the hour. The pears move faster, then the street's shadow has become a shelter and hands are freer, because morning's obligations have been filed. A paper hanger arrives later, knowing that people decide about calendars best when their mouths are not full. A silk dealer comes last, trusting cloth strong enough to let patience do the sales. In the afternoon, the bell tells the hour for sleep for the very young and the very old. The street softens for a while, and even the hawker of sweet rice thinks it better to lower his ladle's voice. In the counting hall, time and number share a bench. An abacus keeps the beat, while a clerk reads a slip aloud. Measured voice, measured beats. A second clerk repeats the slip without looking at it, so that sound and memory agree. A third agrees with paper. If the three friends nod, a seal finds paste and letters find an envelope. The envelope smells faintly of smoke and glue, like a campfire that learned to write. A porter ties a cord that opens easily because letters like to meet eyes without wrestling first. As evening tips into blue, towers speak their quiet duet, bell first, drum after, then bell again to say enough. On roofs, cranes take the shape they take when wind is not a subject. The great wall turns the last of the sun into a long thought and hands it back to the hills. In courtyards, lamp flames are coaxed into being and then persuaded to stay within their manners. Door rings accept cords tied in loops that choose to be easy in case a child is sent for more tea leaves. The canal's surface becomes the kind of ink a brush would be proud to write on. Night makes its own calendars. In one house, an incense coil will draw a slow spiral that an old woman can read without opening her eyes. In another, a bamboo drip will sound 6 times between stirrings and then rest. No alarm, only a way to recognize that sleep has been walking faithfully beside breath. A scribe lays his brush down when the incense tinkles the small bell at its end. He straightens the paper, sets the cloud-shaped weight on the corner, coils the lamp thread once around the base, and whispers habit, not magic. Tomorrow. Tomorrow nods from the windowsill. If sleep arrives, let it. Bells will keep their bronze courtesy. Drums will keep muscle without temper. Floats will keep their shy edges. Incense will keep time like a friend walking beside you. Gnomons will keep the angle of a season. Lanterns will keep their hooks. Cords will keep their loops that open abacuses, will keep their lanes. Passes will keep their squares of red promise. The wall will keep the seam at the horizon. The seam will keep the sky from forgetting its shape. The sky will keep the city's patience. Morning will come as a clerk comes to a desk, on time, grateful to find tools where he left them, pocket pictures to carry, a bronze bell's lip shining, where a hand has always steadied it. A float board pausing at the notch named, nearly a crane-foot incense rest a lantern, one hook farther down the corridor, a bamboo spout. Tipping with the softest decision, water can make a gnome on, stepping across a stone. If reading a little cake of paste, breathing on a desk, a reed pinched between two fingers, to ask the air about damp, a drum mallet resting. With felt up, would down a great wall beacon tower holding the outline of a conversation it no longer needs to have. If sleep arrives, let it. Hours will keep moving, kindly and exact, whether you watch them or not. When you return, the bell will be where it belongs, the drum where it should be, the float board ready to welcome the next drop, your place held in the book of the day by ordinary instruments doing ordinary work. The fifth part. A road is a promise that learned manners. It keeps its edges swept where carts might otherwise scold the grass. It lowers its voice at streams, so wheels can cross without remembering fear. It bows at passes, then stands again on the far side as if nothing exceptional occurred. North of the city, a relay station waits at the right distance for a horse's comfort. Its courtyard is square, its shade is honest, its bucket sits shoulder to shoulder by a trough that wears the mark of many soft muzzles. A bell is hung low enough to be a kindness. When it rings, it asks for attention the way a friend does once, then not again. The gatekeeper knows arrivals by their footfall. Caravan feet have brushed to them, couriers carry a string in their step. If a line ran from heel to horizon, salt carts arrive, as if finishing a paragraph. He takes a pass without ceremony, reads the red square a seal has given it, and touches a brush to paste, so the station sign can agree with the sign at the last gate. He does not read the words, the square is enough, the feel of the paper is enough, the weight of the cord is enough. He ties a slip knot in the corner, so the pass can hang from a peg and lie flat by its own gravity. Knots that open are the grammar of travel. Horses keep the day in quarters. First quarter, oats and water. Second, a road that learns its pace. Third, shade and curry. Fourth, oats again, and the bucket turned upside down to say the day consented. A stable boy checks hooves with a thumb that has grown into the habit. He ties a rope low across a stall so a horse will remember when not to step when dreams are working. A farrier warms a small iron and floats it above an old shoe to coax out a nail. His hammer keeps a modest music that tells the road, we are not in a hurry. We are in the middle. Mountains teach a different politeness. The path climbs by refusing to argue with height all at once. Steps are laid where the rock will listen. Tight corners keep the slope from becoming a speech. At a cut-water bridge, stone shoulders the rivers shove and offers a thin seam that water can split itself upon. A rope rail is set a handspan above a waist, high enough to help, low enough to admit honesty if a pack animal needs to go alone. Flags hang limp today. The wind has chosen to be elsewhere. The path pauses at a shrine the size of a lunchbox. Someone has left a twig. Someone else has set a pebble on top of that twig. The shrine looks pleased. From the ridge, the great wall is less wall than seam, a joining of ridges to intention. Beacon towers sit like patient punctuation. A stair climbs, then flattens to let breath pass, then climbs again. The stone keeps yesterday's warm hand inside it. A watch platform makes a square so exact that shadow and sun take turns with the precision of two bookkeepers. No one is sending fire today, yet the hearts in those towers remember how flame behaves dry fuel below. Slender tinders above, a breath that lifts the ember to its task, and then withdraws, so the ember can remain a citizen of its own heat. Habit is a form of readiness that harms no one. At the pass gate, posts are worn where shoulders brush them, rings mounted in stone wait at either side. High four riders, low four people leading mules. The keeper oils the rings with tallow not because rings need kindness, but because rope does. He keeps a ledger that is short on words and long on honesty. Dates softened to season, direction, count, reason the last written as a drawing anyone can understand. A small fish means river trade. A square with dots means grain. A tiny box with a line through it means paper. When storms close a saddle farther east, the keeper draws a cloud, then hesitates, then adds a second line, rain and wind. Two lines are enough to give room to decisions down the road. Caravans want rhythm, they open like fans and close like books. In the morning, ropes come off pegs and become lines with purpose. Loads rise with knees, never with backs alone. The call used to agree the first steps is less shout than ribbon of sound that curls around ears without tightening. The led mule chooses the center of the path because stones are more honest there. Bells on collarbones let each animal know where the others like to be. When a narrow place approaches, the bell voices diminish without anyone touching them. Even metal, in such work, learns to read the air. A courier arrives with dust the color of distance in the pleats of his sleeves. He drinks without story. He flips his pass to show the last station's mark and waits for the new one like someone who has learned to prefer agreements to speed. His stirrup leather looks tired. The farrier offers a new hole and a thong to keep the buckle from talking to itself. The courier smiles with all the quiet gratitude of a man who will be grateful again in 2 hours for something similarly small. He sets off with a fresh mount that has eaten the idea of running and accepted the idea of carrying a message instead. Down country, the road spreads its fingers where markets meet. A weighing frame stands under an awning, planks laid on stalls become a counting bench. Tea sellers hang gourd ladles from a cord that crosses the path, a shared convenience. No one's property, everyone's. A man with paper wrapped around an ink cake rubs it thoughtfully as if the paper were seasoning, then tucks it back as if the ink had answered the question. A woman ties her child's sleeve to her belt with a loop that opens at a tug. The child can wander a little and then remember home without fear. Roads that allow short wanderings have better memories. Salt caravans carry the taste of weather. Bags are thick and know about rain. Lattice crates keep tiles from brooding during jolts. When a slope forces a rest, drivers loosen girths a finger's width, and a mule's eyes learn to soften. At a river ford, stepping stones are set just proud of the current. Their upstream faces are shaved to a knife that carves water into ribbons. Their downstream sides are padded with moss that offers a second thought to any foot that misreads. A boy looks down and counts fish. He's wrong about the number and pleased with his wrongness. A map lives in the pass house. No town names are carved there, only hills, rivers, posts, and little teeth for passes. A braided cord loops through to carved rings at its corner. The cord has 3 colors, the canal's green, the high road's umber, and a thread of pale for winter routes over flats that only some years consent to. The keeper runs a finger along the pale, then removes it, then lays it along the umber because summer has made its mild decisions. When he hangs the map back on its peg, the rings click softly, agreeing with each other about gravity. On the lee side of the ridge, a terrace field meets a road as a friend meets a friend. Each gives a little space. The field's edge carries a small gutter to keep the path from becoming rice. The path's edge carries a shoulder of gravel to keep the field from becoming shoes. Women bend as a line that moves exactly fast enough to make a day honest and exactly slow enough to be done before lanterns ask for oil. At noon, baskets at the path's side accept ladles, lids, and the second apples. A man who has finished his section smooths dirt that had nothing to do with him. The path thanks him by existing. When rain begins, honest rain that means well, the station brings oiled cloths to spare saddles, the insult of wet. Rope is coiled, under eaves rings are wiped, the hearth is encouraged, and the kettle that has learned the schedule of weather makes itself useful. Travelers set their passes on the warm brick of the Kong to relax their curls. Steam lifts, carrying the day's creases off the paper and into the rafters, where spiders practice quiet arithmetic. Heat behind the back, rain ahead of the door, a cup that knows how to be refilled. There are few better clocks. Evening makes statements into ellipses. The ridge loses detail and keeps meaning. The Great Wall lets the last light brush its stair treads and then withdraws behind the idea of stone. Beacon towers draw in their silhouettes like people settling into blankets. In the station yard, H-shaped racks hold saddles, so leather will breathe. Girths are hung, so buckles do not bruise anything that must be soft tomorrow. A groom sets the first of pebbles into a small dish by the door. Shift 1. Shift 2, so whoever wakes later can continue counting without waking anyone else. Pebbles have a good memory for sleep. Night travel is permitted when moon and reason agree. A lantern on a pole leads a pack train, a modest star, that only people who need a star notice. Its light does not chase darkness, it tells the path that it has not been forgotten. At intervals, rings set in low parapets along the most narrow places offer a place for a rope to rest while a load chooses its balance. The ring is a thought made iron. Here, patience is helpful. Thoughts like that make roads safe. If sleep arrives, let it. Passes will keep their courtesy to breath, bridges will keep the waters push into hands, rings will keep their fair faces, ropes will keep their willingness to be taught, bells will keep their small honest voices, ledgers will keep their drawings that say fish, grain, paper maps will keep their cords, posts will keep their quiet squares of shade, saddles will keep their shape for tomorrow's backs. The wall will keep the seam that lets wind say to itself, this way. The road will keep your place between two stones that was set with care. Pocket pictures to carry. A pass hanging by a loop that opens when asked, a trough polished by 100 soft muzzles, a farrier's hammer keeping the smallest music, a shrine with a twig and a pebble doing the work of hoper. Cut water's thin shoulder dividing a river's, thought a bell hung low and rung once. Then trusted a collar bell quieting itself at a narrow place, a map corner with two carved rings and a braid of 3 colors, stepping stones shaved to knife on one side and kindness on the other, to pebbles in a dish beginning a night's gentle counting. If sleep arrives, let it. The station will still be at the right distance. When you wake, the horse will still prefer quarters. The keeper will still draw a cloud properly. The ford will still convert rush into ribbons. The wall will still be what stone remembers to be, and the road will still be the shape of agreements made by people who intended each other well. The 6th part. Harbors prefer courtesy to hurry. At first light, the tide lays its hand flat and invites holes to remember how to sit well. Keystones warm by degrees, rings brighten where ropers taught them fairness. A harbor master touches 3 things: ledger, sounding pole, lamp hook, and the day begins as it means to go on, in agreements. Boxes arrive with corners wrapped in plated straw, lids carry a loop of cord that opens without argument. 2 seals mark each chest, 1 for weight, 1 for the road it took to reach water. The wax is a modest red, the stamp a square that says seen. Junks rest along the quay like patient rooms. Their ribs are rounder than river boats, their bellies divided by bulkheads that make each space a promise to the others. A carpenter's bench holds bronze nails and wooden pegs both, because wood and metal share the task without jealousy. The stern post rudder waits with its shoulders in the water. A lift rope rests over a pulley, so the blade can be raised if the harbor grows shallow-minded. Planks at the gangway wear hemp mats, not because feet are precious, though they are, but because mats teach shoes to grip without learning fear. On deck, a compass sits under a little house. It is not asked to be a conjurer, only a steady friend. The card draws its flower in quiet ink, the needle minds the habit it has learned from lodestone. Beside it a tray holds signal boards, narrow planks painted in plain shapes, an alphabet of angles for wind and course. The boatswain's whistle speaks softly, not shrill, and the crew answer more with hands than voices. A braid of reefing lines sleeps at the boom. When the wind forgets its manners, those lines will remember theirs. Today the sail is content to be generous and the boom content to be patient. Stowage is a school of kindness. Tea chests sit low, sugar higher. Porcelain, where it can be visited by hands that know how to lift without scolding. Between chests, wedges of pine keep corners from arguing between tiers. Planks lie like the compages of a book. A tally string ties a knot for each 10, a fatter knot for each 50, and a plain loop at the end that opens when asked, so the ledger can be neat as a kitchen shelf. The purser runs a bead on his abacus, and then delays a second bead until his breath catches it up. The habit does not slow him. It keeps the day from jolting. The harbour's skin is marked with rings. Some sit at the waterline 4 lines, some high on parapets 4 poles and lanterns. The iron is black, where weather has been teaching it a smear of tallow at each ring's lower quarter spares rope, a kind of conversation that becomes sorrow later. A rope keeper wipes the smear with a rag that has earned its stains honestly. He knots a loop that lives by opening and lays the loop on his palm, if showing it to a guest. Nearby a pair of stone bollards accept a rider hitch with a grace learned from long afternoons. Sampans traffic between ship and shore like calmers. A woman rows standing and glances not at the water, but at the ring she intends. Her child kneels at the bow with a boat hook that has learned to nudge, not stab. Cargo passes hand to hand, box to plank, plank to deck, deck to hold. Each pair of hands asks the next if it is ready before it lets go. A small drum up on the pier keeps 3 strokes for work, 1 for rest, 3 for work, 1 for rest. No one needs to be told. The drum says it kindly, and the day knows how to listen. A customs shed near the gate smells of pine, paste, and afternoon. A table hosts a balance with arms like a well-mannered bird. Its pans accept coin, grain, and boxes of camphor without having to believe any of them. A clerk opens a lid and asks a chest to loan him a cup of tea leaves for the scale. Another clerk notes the weight with a dot, not a number, and the seal with a square, not a name. A third presses a stamp so the chest can make friends with other rooms down the coast. Their cranes of red paste sleep in shallow saucers, their brushes rest with their hairs politely gathered. By the slipway, a lay-up hull is learning its next season. Caulkers need pitch that knows about weather, hemp that knows about swell, and a little oil that knows about patience. They press the mix into seams with child-sized paddles and tamp it with mallets that speak in the low grammar shipwrights prefer. A boy warms a spoon in a pot and smooths a stubborn strip until it shines the way a thought shines when it finally agrees with itself. The master checks a plank with a baton, and a string the curve the string has chosen pleases him. He says nothing, and the crew accepts the silence like a compliment. Where the harbour opens its mouth to sea, a beacon hill keeps an old habit. A drum lies under a shed with its skin covered. A frame holds a bucket of sand and 3 bundles of dry sticks. No alarms are invited today. The keeper oils the drum's rim anyway, because readiness is a courtesy even when it will not be used. Far out where wind paints the water, a darker idea of itself, to junks lean into a long comfort. Their sails, panelled like careful windows, remember the hands that mended them. The hems are bound with cord that supports without singing. Some supports do their best work anonymously. Below deck, the bulkheads prove their promise. A small leak in one space is a lesson, not a disaster. A boy hears the sound, reports it without drama, and returns with a rag threaded through to fingers and a wooden wedge taught to go firm, not violent. He taps the wedge into its choice of angle, and the drip becomes a reluctance. He smiles the way someone smiles who has learned that tools are friends and problems are just invitations. His foreman scratches 3 short lines by the brace today's little memory. Later, on shore, the carpenter who cut the plank will measure his next tenon. Glance at the mark in his book that says North Slip, 3rd brace, and adjust by a hair. Tomorrow's quiet is built there. Out on the tide, a buoy made of cedar floats with dignity. It carries a ring and a flag, and a seam of lead around its waist. At flood it sits high, at ebb it rests lower, never breaking its promise to show where ground is honest and where it is only pretending to be. The pilot boat visits the buoy, rubs barnacles from its lip with a brush that knows which way attention should flow, and leaves a strip of cloth tied with a loop that will open when the buoy is satisfied. From shore the buoy looks like a dot, from the deck looks like a sentence mark that remembers to hush. In the warehouse rows, the floor shines with a wax that learned to prefer a soft stride. Bales of silk lie like well-behaved clouds, ribbons tucked so no one's step will catch. A dye house farther inland washes its vats with lime and a broom, teases indigo into thinking, and ends the day with skeins gathered like sleeping swallows across a beam. A clerk from the dye house comes to the harbour with a page that shows 3 blues: sky, water, midnight. The beer from the cloth room agrees on water with a finger, and the page is stamped with a square that says the same thing in the same way without letters. Agreements do not require flourish to hold. Spring tides share space with river water, and the harbour learns two languages at once. During the turn, men sit backward on the quay and listen until chatter becomes a steady hum. The first wind of evening decides to be underhand, then changes its mind and becomes a lie. Flags at the customs shed no longer argue with themselves. Swallows spin above the masts, wiring the air back to its polite architecture. Lamps are set on hooks only tall enough to be useful. Lines are taken in, but not taught. Lines dislike being asked for more than is graceful. Supper on deck is a low bowl and a spare spoon. The crew wedge themselves by habit into angles the ship offers. Their talk is the kind that does not chase the end of a sentence. It lets the end find itself. A boy knuckles the corner of a tea chest and thinks about what distance tastes like. A man who has seen 50 winters checks his knots the way someone checks a memory while it still belongs to him. Before the city's sleep borrows it for the night. Stars read themselves in the harbour water, the reading pleases them. If sleep arrives, let it. Rings will keep their fairness, ropes will keep their knowledge of how to open rudders, will keep their shoulders bulkheads, will keep their self-control pitch, will keep its seal buoys, will keep their dot of truth drums, will keep their covered skin compasses, will keep their ordinary miracle seals, will keep their square civility tallies, will keep their knots. The shore will keep a gentle hand for the returning boot. The sea will keep its firm handshake for the leaving hull. Your place will keep itself at the lip of the ledger, where the evening wrote enough pocket pictures to carry. A rudder lifted by a rope, without complaint a compass card safe, under a little house a ring polished where rope remembers being good, a wedge quieting a dripper buoy, with a lead seam holding its pasture in. Chopper tea chest stamped twice. Square upon square a signal board tilted to say steady, a corker's spoon smoothing pitch to shine, a sampan boat hook nudging. Not stabbing, a covered drum waiting, useful even in its patience. If sleep arrives, let it. The harbour will still practice courtesy tomorrow. The sea will still be an honest partner. The warehouse will still know the hour when footsteps prefer to whisper. And the shipwright's baton will still curve the way reason does when it behaves. The seventh part. Fields teach patience by inches. Before the sun takes a firm hold, a farmer's foot presses the bunt, a narrow, raised lip of earth that persuades water to mind its place. The bunt listens. It does not shout, it holds. A bamboo scoop lifts from a feeder channel and lets fall a soft braid of water into a paddy that has learned to be a mirror. The mirror accepts sky only as much as rice can use. The rest slides along to the next square, and then the next, a polite procession of shallow decisions. In the east corner, a stone marks the high line. In the west, a carved notch shows enough. Between them, a day becomes measurable without ever asking for a number. Seedlings arrived weeks ago from a nursery bed no wider than a cart is long. They grew close, like a conversation whispered among friends. Now they travel, 100 at a time, their roots wrapped in a plate of damp straw that keeps them calm. Hands set them out with a rhythm that never scolds the back. Press, straighten, step, press, straighten, step. Each plant finds a square of space the size of a palm. The field becomes a grid of green notes on a page of water. Wind passes and the notes decide, politely, to agree with one another. Farther uphill, terraces hold soil against the pull of rain. Walls are dry laid, stone fitted to stone, until the seam itself is a promise. Between lifts, channels wander on purpose, choosing the slow route, so silt will have time to settle where roots prefer it. A weir made of willow and rocklings just enough to be helpful. The water forgets to hurry at the sight of such modesty. A boy follows the channel with a twig, flicking leaves and little hindrances aside. His father lets him believe the river is grateful. In its own way, the river is. Irrigation's instruments are simple and precise. A chain pump turns with a tread that welcomes bare feet. Wooden paddles inside a bamboo trough collect water from a stream that remembers mountain news, then carry it upward in a slow necklace of drops. At the crest, the water tips into a lip that widens to share. The pump sings in a low voice, a song made of wooden teeth and patience. A woman pauses at the tread, shifts her weight, and another woman takes her place without words. A gourd ladle rests on a peg, and a towel hangs from a nail that has learned to be useful without ceremony. Down in the lower fields, ducks patrol between rows, nosing weeds and little pests without much sense of labor. Their feet do the work of light rakes, their appetites the work of a careful hand. A bamboo fence teaches them the boundaries of their helpfulness. On its posts, a strip of cloth flutters like a flag. No one is required to salute. In the distance, a drum speaks once from the hamlet, and the bell answers by breathing its bronze breath. Time rolls, water follows, hands continue. The mill by the stream eats the day in polite mouthfuls. Its stone pair is dressed with lines that guide grain into becoming flour and bran into remembering its own path. A sluice gate, pinned with 2 pegs and guarded by a plank, angles water against the wheel. When a frog chooses to inspect the lower trough, someone laughs without making sound, collects the visitor with both hands, and returns him to the weeds beside the bank. A tray of millstones waits to be trued, a chalk line waits to be snapped across their faces, a wooden straight edge rests between them like an older sibling. Granaries keep weather in mind. Low windows allow air to walk through, floors rise on stone-footed posts, so rats will consider other careers. At the doorway, a bench accepts wicker baskets, each marked with a dab of clay. 1 dot for a quarter, to 4 1/2, 3 4 full. A clerk plucks a stalk from the thatch and uses it to scratch a simple ledger of arrivals and departures on a board that has known many such lists. When the board fills, the list is copied onto paper and sealed with a square of cinnabar paste. The paper's words would be legible if anyone chose to read them. No one needs to. The dot and the square are enough. A shrine to the field god sits where bun meets path. It is not grand, its roof keeps the weather out, and its niche is big enough for rice wine in a cup and to apricots if the season consents. A little bell hangs from a reed hook. It makes a sound like a smile with no teeth. Passers-by touch the bell by accident on purpose. No calamity is asked to leave, no miracle is asked to arrive. Please keep the stream steady, the bell says. The stream does what it was already going to do, but it likes being asked. By afternoon, the Grand Canal receives the day's quieter gossip. Polemen push with shoulders that know when bottom will be honest and when it will pretend. Cargo, sacks stitched shut with twine, and wax jars, whose shoulders are marked with a line to show the right fullness, bundles that sigh when settled and hush when tied with the loop that opens. Lock gates swing on hinges that have learned to like the taste of water. Their paddles lift a little, then a little more, until the level rests where it belongs. A child counts the drops that fall from the paddle edge, wrong, then right, then bored, then at peace. Bridges keep stories safe without needing to hear them. A stone arch stands where the canal bends, high enough to welcome sails, low enough to be modest. Under its belly, the shade draws a cool between 2 warm hours. A man standing in a sampan's stern lowers his head out of respect, not necessity. On the parapet, rings wait for the day when rope will need a place to remember itself. Today, the ring only keeps the habit. At the tea house by the lock, a landlord reads the foaming cups as if weather left footnotes. His wife arranges cups on a tray so the handle of the teapot will not burn the hand that pours. A ledger sits open to a page that smells faintly of ink and hibiscus. When the miller comes with flour dust on his sleeves, he settles into a corner that has been empty for exactly the right amount of time. When the canal man arrives, he hangs his pole on brackets under the eaves. Good poles like to rest straight. When the duck boy arrives, the landlord adds a spoonful without charge because ducks had no ideas today, and he respects that. Harvest has its choreographies, but none that need drums. Sickles are wrapped in cloth until the moment comes. Scythes are invited only where the ground can be trusted to lie even. Sheaves stand and nod at each other in rows that remember both order and generosity. A winnowing tray lifts grain into the afternoon breeze, and the chaff chooses to travel elsewhere. The tray knows the difference between wind that helps and wind that shows off. When the last lift brings nothing but clean kernels and a little pride, the tray rests against a wall and both are justified. Evening collects water where shadows point. Channels run slower, frogs practice a syllabus of syllables. The chain pump steps turn under lighter feet. A woman skims the paddy with a reed rake. She plucks the last floating weed of the day and sets it on the bund so it can dry into tomorrow's dust. The stone at the corner gathers the last blush of sunlight and holds it for a long minute. Even stones prefer long goodbyes. A lantern on the path finds its hook. The boy with the twig has finally put the twig down. Night does not erase work, it sets it to cool. In the granary, a tiny draft walks under the floor and another strolls above the rafters. They trade stories about heat and leave none behind. In the canal, the surface becomes dark silk. The pole bracket under the eave enjoys the sound of nothing. In the field, the grid of seedlings keeps its squares without judgment. Up on the northern horizon, the Great Wall is only a thought, but thoughts can be good company. The seam holds sky to land the way. A binding stitch holds paper to paper quietly, tightly, without needing to be mentioned. If sleep arrives, let it. Buns will keep their edges, terraces will keep their stones that listen, chain pumps will keep their slow necklace of drops, ducks will keep their honest appetites, mills will keep their lines that teach grain manners, granaries will keep air moving, locks will keep levels, polite bridges will keep shade properly, ledgers will keep dots that do what numbers intend, and the canal will keep the town stitched to the fields. The wall will keep the horizons seamed, the seam will keep weather from talking too quickly, weather will keep its promises small. Pocket pitchers to carry, a bamboo scoop pouring a braid of water, a grid of seedlings and a page of lighter willow and rock weir leaning just enough, a chain pump's tread. Empty and welcoming duckbills, nosing between rice and millstones, chalk line, waiting to be snapped to granaries, rat stopper posts, like little mushrooms. Under the floor a lock paddle lifted a little, then a little more, a tea house pole bracket under eaves, a cornerstone, keeping the day's last blush with uncomplicated loyalty. If sleep arrives, let it. Morning will find the water where it should be, the seedlings where they were set, the wheel where it turns without complaint, and the ledger where the clay dots wait to become a square of paste. Your place will be where the bun meets the path, cool and ordinary, ready. The eighth part. Paper begins as water, learning to hold a thought. In a courtyard behind a low gate, vats sit like quiet ponds. A worker lowers a bamboo screen into a vat where pulp floats, mulberry bark softened, bamboo slivers talked out of their stiffness, rags persuaded back into cloud. He lifts the screen in one smooth promise. A skin of fiber gathers, thin as morning breath. He tilts, lets the corner surrender a heartbeat of water, then sets the screen on a felted bed. Another worker lays a second screen, and a third, until a small stack becomes a patient hill. Weight will visit, water will go on its way. Pressing is a conversation without adjectives. Boards settle on the stack, a lever lowers stones, climb onto the lever, as if they were lazy cats consenting to be helpful. Drops thread out and remember the earth. When the weight is lifted, each sheet is a wet moon. A woman takes one by its edges and couches it onto a warm plank. Her hands know the angle that keeps corners loyal. She smooths with a brush of reeds that only scold if asked. Later, a lum in a thin bath will teach the page to refuse a flood of ink. Later still, sun and shade will conspire to make a flat, even kindness you can write on. Ink is stone taught to swim. In a scholar's room, the inkstick sits on its rest like a black fruit. A few drops of water enter the inkstone's hollower, a little lake behind a weathered dam. The stick circles a scent of pine, and soup wakes up. A pool deepens until it looks like a piece of night you could pour. The brush waits between fingers that have learned softness as a tool. Its hairs hold together for a first vertical stroke, then open a little for a second that feels like exhaling, then lift into the air and forget they were ever wet. On paper this honest, a line does not shout. It arrives, sits, and becomes the kind of neighbor you trust to mind your door ring when you're away. Blocks of pages that learned wood's patience. A carver pins paper to perwood with two tiny pegs. He oils the paper so the characters can be seen through from the far side, then lays it face down. What was dark becomes light to be preserved. What was blank will become the valleys where ink waits. Knives find their lanes with the restraint of men who have carved for decades. Curls whisper away. A test sheet takes ink from a soft pad, finds the block, and then accepts a steady rubbing from a palm-sized tool wrapped in bamboo fibers. No thunder, only a low, dry murmur. The page appears with the gentle certainty of a tide. He checks the corner notches registration pegs, tell him the lines have kept their promise. A binder works in a room that smells of starch and paste. Sheets are folded so that the strong side faces out. Then gathered into gatherings a word that means exactly what it sounds like. Needle and thread run a simple track along a spine. Knots hide where fingers won't disturb them. Title slips wear a brush stroke or two. Nothing to wake a sleeper. A seal in cinnabar gives a square that says this is this, and a second square that says and it was seen. The book goes into a wrap that ties with a loop that opens when asked. Books that are easy to open are books that will be remembered. In the print house, rollers of paper dry on racks like careful ladders. An apprentice checks each sheet by letting light touch it from behind, and even places show themselves without shame, and are set aside for wrappers and practice. The good sheets go into a stack with a board between every 50. A small weight sits on the top sheet, so the last curl can learn manners while still keeping room to breathe. The master has a page of characters he admires because they stand as if they were listening. He keeps that page at the edge of the table so his hand will remember to listen too. Messages travel better when agreements do. A woodblock printer and a courier meet by the door. The printer wraps a bundle in strong paper, ties it with a cord that ends in a loop, and presses a square of paste that says the town downriver expects this. The courier tests the loop with a tug. Yes. It opens easily if a clerk downstream needs to look. Yes. It closes without sulking. He slides the bundle into a bag that smells faintly of tea and rain. Outside, the road that prefers manners waits with its own memory. Relay posts at the right distances, rings set in stone where a rope can rest, a small bell at a gate that asks for attention once and then trusts. A block cutter visits the kiln that fires glaze onto bowls. He sits near the door to borrow warmth and shows a potter the shallow trenches his knives made. The potter nods as if greeting cousins. Your grooves are my foot rings, your edges, my rims. Crafts learn from each other by looking, not by speeches. In a corner, a tray of porcelain spoons write their own comma-shaped reflections into the air. The carver runs a finger along a spoon's thinness and thinks how a page ought to feel under a sleeve in winter, cool and exact, but kind to skin. Rain begins at last. The print shop relaxes. Paper likes rain if it can watch from under the eaves. The carvers oil their knives, then wrap the blades in oiled paper that will not argue with wood when morning asks patience again. A boy sweeps curls of wood into a basket, tips them into a brazier, and hears them remember the tree with a last dry story. In the yard, a covered rack of ink sticks approves of whether they harden best when afternoons agree to be honest. A cat counts sheets by sleeping through 3 stacks and then choosing a 4th. Evening gives the city back its lamps. At the south gate, a bookseller closes the flap of his stall. He sets out a little sign to dots of red paste on paper that tells regulars he will return with copies promised today. A girl follows her mother's hand along the spines of wrapped volumes. Her finger stops at a book whose corners are patient. She asks nothing out loud. The mother understands anyway. The bookseller smiles the small smile of a man who has memorized a town by its hands. He takes an awl, adds one more stitch to the wrap's tie, so the book will ride home without slippage, and bows a little toward the paper, not the person. Night collects tools into their boxes. The inkstone's lake dries to a sheen that remembers every circle. The brush is washed and coaxed back to a point. The block table is wiped with a cloth that has learned the grain by heart. In the alley, water slips along a gutter that keeps door thresholds from carrying too much of the world inside. Far away, the great wall keeps the seam of the sky steady, so clouds can learn their manners. A breeze noses the page on the table and decides to leave it be. The door ring accepts its loop and becomes quiet metal again. If sleep arrives, let it. Bats will keep their small pond screens, will keep their thin moon's weights, will keep courteous pressure alum, will keep the page from drowning inkstones, will keep their patient hollows blocks, will keep their valleys knives, will keep their lanes pads, will keep the low murmur of printing threads, will keep their spines seals, will keep their squares wraps, will keep their loops that open. Roads will keep their distances gates, will keep their gentle bells kins, will keep their east-facing mounds, and books will keep the habit of returning to hands that treat them well. Pocket pitchers to carry, a wet sheet lifted like a moon, a lever accepting stones that climb like cats, a black pool and a grey stone, a knife shaving a sliver that curls into a karma, and sleeps, a pad rubbing ink into paper with the sound of a sleeve across a table, a stitch disappearing into a spine, a seal lifting to show a perfect square of red, a bundle tied with a loop that opens when asked, a cat sleeping across 3 stacks of paper as if counting with. For a door ring quiet under a clean wrap. If sleep arrives, let it. Morning will find pulp ready, knives sharp, paper obedient and light, blocks waiting like low hills, and the first brushstroke that steps onto the page, if onto a path it already trusts. The 9th part. Mulberry keeps its promises by seasons. In spring, hands prune the trees with a mind for shade and reach, not drama. New shoots take gentle angles, old wood retires without complaint. Leaves arrive in a soft rush, a green that prefers to hold its voice down. Women step between trunks with baskets on their hips, they pluck without bruising. A twist and lift that leaf and branch both appreciate. The path underfoot has learned to remember where feet like to be. At the rose end, a stone holds a jar of water. Beneath its skirt of cool, a ladle waits with the patience of good tools. Far off, a ridge makes a line that is not proud. Somewhere beyond that line, the Great Wall keeps a scene none of these leaves will ever need to test. Silkworm houses wear shade like a rule. Racks rise in tiers. Bamboo trays set like quiet balconies. Eggs wake into threads of appetite. And mulberry leaves become an education. A girl lays leaves evenly, not because silk requires ceremony, but because evenness is a kindness. The Worms answer with work so small it sounds like a sand shower behind a curtain. She listens, smiles, and adds another tray to meet the sound halfway. When heat grows ambitious, a reed screen lowers over the door, and the day remembers restraint. A clay pot of water stands by the threshold to argue softly with dust. Cocoons are patients taking a shape, hold in. When they are ready, a woman lifts a tray and tips it gently into a wide basket, lined with cloth, that has known this task since it was cut. The basket sits while a kettle warms, the water learns its steady mouth, never boiling, always speaking low. A handful of cocoons enter the bath and float like modest moons. A broom of bristles seeks the loose end at a cocoon's crown, it finds it as a finger finds a familiar door ring. By memory and touch, several filaments agree to travel together. They twist into a single strand that looks thin and is not. A reel turns with a music almost acquired to deserve the name, an old song about wrists and patience, and how to feed a moving circle without teaching it pride. The reeler's left hand holds a boat-shaped guide, her right hand minds the reel. When a cocoon stumbles, she lifts, smooths, offers it back to the water with a small kindness. The strand continues as if nothing had happened. Silk forgives when treated as a friend. On a nearby table, cakes of raw silk dry into loaves. Their faces show faint spirals, the memory of many small decisions that found one road. A clerk weighs each loaf on a balance that does not care for excitement. He marks a dot on paper, then another dot in clay, then presses a square stamp on cloth. 3 mediums, 1 agreement. Agreements sleep better that way. Dye houses keep their own weather. Vats of indigo, madder, and yellow bark sit under a thatch that lets air think and sun remember moderation. Indigo asks a particular courtesy, the vat should be fed, not startled. A woman stirs with a paddle that has learned to be both firm and kind. The surface blooms, then subsides, a flower appears and closes the vat, sighs its approval. A skein of silk enters, held by sticks that keep hands safe and twist honest. It leaves the vat green and, while air shakes the dye awake into blue, the silk drips like a calm rain that decided to fall upward for a change. On a beam, 3 strings hang with knots. First knot feeds, second stir, third rest. Knots are calendars that even a sleepy house can keep. Loom's breathing counts. A warp stretches tight and even, a field of parallel intentions. The weaver sits with feet on treadles and hands on shuttle and reed. She presses a treadle, heddles lift, a shed opens, with the modesty of a curtain, in a well-behaved breeze. The shuttle goes and returns, the reed kisses the weft into place. Her song, if you can call that small humming a song, keeps the rhythm from needing to call attention to itself. On the wall, a slip of paper shows the pattern not in characters, but in little squares, dark 4 over, light 4 under. A child can read it. A loom prefers such honesty. Brocade asks for more voices. To weavers sit, feet crossing in a quiet dance, hands sharing the shuttle, so a second thread can draw a cloud, a wave, the suggestion of a peony that has no need to bloom to be understood. A boy stands behind with pattern cords looped over pegs. When one weaver hums a note that means lift, he lifts. When she hums another that means let be, he rests. He will grow and take a seat one day. For now, his hands learn the grammar of cloth without the burden of grammar's words. The brocade grows a garden that will fold and travel in a trunk, then open in a room far away and remind the new room that distance is a habit, not an argument. In the counting room, lengths are measured against a board that keeps its own counsel. A mark at the end is not a number, just a notch. A clerk notes 3 simple things on a tag: the notch mark, a dot for color, a square for scene. He ties the tag with a loop that opens. The loop makes the tag a guest, not a jailer. Bolts lie on shelves, like resting rivers. Light from a high window tastes each surface without drinking too much. A moth trap sits in the corner, a pot of fragrant oil, a lamp wick asleep, a mesh barrier that asks politely and receives compliance. Predators respect good manners more often than one would think. Out at the dye house porch, a line strung under the eaves holds sample ribbons. Indigo at 3 feeds, indigo at 5, indigo with a whisper of black. Madder plain, madder persuaded by a lum to stay longer. A beer arrives with eyes that know winter from summer by the way sunlight treats color. He points with 2 fingers, not one, and the dyer nods. Rather than argue over words, they take a small ribbon to the canal and see what Shadow does to it. Shadow says, "This will behave indoors." Decision made. A stamp resumes its square, and both men release a breath they were not holding very tightly. Silk travels like light that consented to be cloth. Bales wrapped in oiled paper ride on poles over shoulders that know where bones prefer padding. On the road, relay posts recognize honest loads, and hello go by the smell of mulberry and steam. A pass bears a red square from the counting room at the post gate. The keeper adds his small rectangle. The shapes do not quarrel, they sit together and become friends. A courier with a lighter pack finds the path beside the wall for a stretch, the seam on the horizon as constant as the thread between his fingers when he mends a strap by moon. He passes a beacon tower, a news today, and thinks about threads that only matter when called. Then he thinks about sleep, which matters without calling. In the city, a workshop cuts robes with chalk. Never hurry. Patterns live on paper that folds like a nap, opens like a memory. To tailors tilt their heads the same way when a sleeve is considered. One says nothing, the other says nothing in agreement. Pieces meet on the table, a needle learns the slope of a shoulder, silk slides with a politeness that sometimes looks like shyness. Lining is laid, so the garments will hang, if remembering the person before it has met them. A weight around stone wrapped in old cloth keeps a hem still, while the thread decides. A woman runs her palm over the finished full, and hears a whisper that has nothing to do with sound. Markets practice courtesy when silk arrives. Bolts do not shout their price, they rest. A vendor lifts a corner to show a peony that only exists if one expects it. A customer sets a coin on the scales pan and waits for the needle to settle, because weight is moral here. To boys at the stall next door, play a game with a string and a ring they toss and catch. Make the ring travel a little, then a little more, then miss and laugh without disappointment, then succeed and say nothing at all. Above them, An awning moves like a page turned by slow wind. Night folds the district into a series of gentle closures. Looms are covered vats where lids. The reeling room cleans its brushes and leaves them bristles up in a jar that smells faintly of pine. A kettle on the wall hook calls and remembers what it held. In the mulberry rose, leaves rest and think about dew. Beyond, the wall keeps its quiet seam and teaches stars the idea of a straight line. A moth worries the lantern for a moment, then chooses darkness over persistence. Darkness receives it without comment. If sleep arrives, let it. Mulberry will keep its green vorms, will keep their sand voice cocoons, will keep their moons reels, will keep their circles vats, will keep their blooming flowers that open and close knots, will keep their calendars looms, will keep their sheds that open like modest doors brocade, will keep its suggestion of gardens counting boards, will keep their notches tags, will keep their square civility passes, will keep their red friends. The wall will keep its horizon. Seam. The road will keep its distances kind ones, measured by water and shade and the promise of a place to rest. Pocket pictures to carry. A tray of cocoons floating like moons in low talking water. A broom finding the threads beginning, without boasting a reel turning with the wrists. Quiet music, a cake of raw silk, holding the memory of many. Small decisions, an indigo flower appearing and closing. Content to looms reed kissing, the weft pattern cords, looped over pegs, like well-behaved vines, a tag tied with a loop that opens a sleeve falling, if it already knows the person, to boy's ring aim, under an awning that turns pages, out of air. If sleep arrives, let it. Morning will find the leaves where they prefer to be, the vorms at their honest work, the reels willing to circle again, the vats persuaded, but never forced, the looms ready to recite their small poem of over and under, and the road prepared to lay a smooth hand under every step that needs it. The 10th part. Edges are not endings, they are places where care collects. Along the northern heights, the wall keeps its habit of being a seam more than a barrier. In morning's level light, it is simple stone and tamped earth stacked in a line that likes to breathe. The path along its crown is as wide as to good promises feet learn to place themselves without instruction. Parapets alternate solid and open, brick teeth and windows that let the land move across the eye without making a speech. To the south, terraces and hamlets. To the north, long grass that respects one's right to revise. Between them, the seam. Rammed earth remembers every strike. At a repair yard below a tower, wooden frames stand like patient rectangles waiting to be filled. Workers shovel a mix earth, sand, small gravel, a little lime into a lift no higher than a forearm. To men lift rammers that look like oversized mallets and begin the quiet work of wait and return. The sound is a low heartbeat. Up, down, settle up, down, settle. A boy pulls a cord to loosen the frame when the lift has learned firmness, and the wall accepts another layer. Bricks in neat stacks wait for the outer face skill-fired rectangles that enjoy the shared work of covering and holding. A brush is dipped in thin slurry and dashed across each brick's belly, so the mortar will feel welcome. Inside the tower, a room keeps tools in a particular order that makes numbers unnecessary. On pegs, coil of line, hooded lantern, key to the gates in a bar. On the floor, a jar of oil, another of paste for seals, a small drum with its skin covered, a wicker screen to tame wind. A list is scratched onto a smooth plank columns of dots, not words. Patrols that should pass, patrols that did, oil used, oil left, weather that arrived, weather expected. A seal lies nearby, a small stone that leaves a square. The square means both done and seen, which is often enough to quiet a house. Signals rest better when they are built, but not begged. On the tower roof, 3 bundles sit dry under a lean toot wigs, resinous sticks, clean straw. A horn is wrapped in cloth, a brazier waits with its mouth closed. Today, none of them aspire to be impressive. The keeper checks the bundles anyway. He loosens a cord, finds the heart of each bundle still willing, reties the knot that opens, sets the bundle back under its small roof. He oils the horn's mouthpiece, not to call anyone, but so it will be ready to be gentle when called. Readiness is a courtesy that hurts no one. A gatehouse keeps the wall's idea of doors. Its timbers are thick, its hinges swing, because they are tended, not because they must. A pass is a strip of paper wrapped around a sliver of wood, a tally that remembers its twin at the far post. The gate clerk accepts the sliver, checks that the notch and grain agree with the ledger square mark, and then presses a second square so the day will later recall that the meeting happened. The cord that ties the pass ends in a loop that knows how to open. The keeper smiles when a courier opens it at the first try. Good loop save time and pride both. Beyond the gate, a market practices the wall's other talent, joining without shouting. Stalls settle in a shallow crescent that keeps wine from making more of itself than it should. Teapots travel from south to north, salt cakes travel from north to south. Wall meets die by way of fingers that can tell winter from spring. A ring set into the stone edge allows a pack line to rest without letting go. A boy lays a pad of felt under the ring so rope will feel respected. A woman compares two combs, one of bone, one of wood. She does not hurry. The combs enjoy being considered. Stone stairs rise to the parapet as an honest angle. A mason kneels with a trowel and persuades a seam to become polite. He tucks a chip of brick where a gap wants to gossip, and then smooths a line as a calligrapher smooths a stroke. He looks up when swallows pass. Swallows always look like agreements. Far along the crown, two men set a little cairn of rocks at the path's edge. 3 stones that mean hidden hole mended. Mind the soft spot for a week. No one writes it down. The stones speak in a universal voice, and the wine translates. Snow visits some days and stays to teach patience. On those mornings, a broom of twigs walks the crown. The keeper holds the handle high and lets the bundle of twigs think for itself. The parapet teeth collect a white that softens their intentions without confusing them. Footprints pair in a pattern that means to together, returning. A kettle on a brazier inside the tower earns steam, and then shares it with the room. Cups are set by the window like quiet moons. Someone says, wine from the west, but polite. Someone else says, polite. The kettle agrees. Spring asks for mortar, summer asks for shade, autumn asks for watchfulness, winter asks for small fires. The wall prefers this cycle to any argument about purpose. In spring, men tamp earth and dash slurry. In summer, canvas shades tied to iron rings make little tents along the crown, so eyes can rest while hands sharpen chisels. In autumn, the watch changes its shoes and counts swallows. In winter, wood is carried not as bravado, but as a promise that fingers will remain useful. A bell at the gate counts the first hours of night, and then retires. The stars know the rest of the schedule by heart. On a clear evening, the seam draws its longest breath. The far hills wear a line of blue that looks like a thought remembering itself. Towers ahead and behind repeat a shape without becoming a chorus. Each is a room with a ladder, a doorstep, a low chest that holds small squares of paste wrapped in wax paper. A patrol arrives with steps that rhyme but do not insist. They touch the ring at the door. Report to dots: 1 for a fox seen at the bottom of the slope, 1 for a cart will needing grease, and they go. The dots are pressed into the plank with the square seal. Done. Seen. Far below, a border river practices humility. It runs where earth has asked it to. It slows where a side channel teases it. It turns the mill wheel for a hamlet that prefers bread to speeches. A ferryman keeps a rope tight between 2 rings set into stone. He teaches the boat to listen to the rope and to ignore conversation. At dusk, he loosens the boat's knot that opens and lets the craft sleep with its nose against a friendly post. A lamp on his crook draws a small circle on the water. A fish approves. Approval is quiet. Night checks the list without looking. Lantern hoods drop. The horn stays wrapped. The brazier remains a circle of iron, not a story. The gate bars whisper against their sockets as a hand tests them and then leaves them alone. The market sleeps inside its bales. A comb in a pocket dreams of hair. The swallows rest under eaves with their tails pointing like karmas. The seam holds, not because it must, but because holding edges is a kindness to both sides. If sleep arrives, let it. Rammers will keep their steady grammar frames will keep their straight minds bricks, will keep their patient faces mortar, will keep its modest glue pegs, will keep loops ready horns, will keep coiled silence bundles, will keep dry bells, will keep the first hours and then keep quiet passes, will keep their twins rings, will keep ropes from learning impatient stares, will keep their honest angle cairns, will keep their small advice, the scene will keep sky and land from misplacing each other. Your place will be a watchman's stall beside a window, with a cup cooling and the wind minding its manners, pocket pictures to carry, a rammer rising and returning until earth chooses firmness a brick, wearing a thin wash of slurry, a polite coat, a hooded lantern testing its hinge, a horn wrapped and oiled, a bundle of dry sticks. Under a lean-to a past wooden sliver, matched to its twin, a ring with a felt pad saving rope from sorrow, 3 warning stones, where a soft spot used to be a broom's twigs, writing simple lines in snow, a tower window making a square of evening that the cup understands. If sleep arrives, let it. Morning will find the crown swept, the gate hinges easy, the ledger plank satisfied with its squares, the market returning to its slow exchange, and the seam still teaching edges how to be friends. The 11th part. Fire is patient when clay deserves it. On a hillside scored with paths, a dragon kill rests like a long thought. Its back climbs in soft steps. Its mouth opens low at the base, its flues rise like quiet chimneys along the spine. Potters work close to the ground, because ground knows how to teach heat. A man lifts a raw bowl thin, where light prefers to live. Thicker at the foot, where a table will ask to be trusted. He taps the rim with a fingernail. The sound decides to be even. The bowl nods. It is ready to meet fire. Glaze begins in bowls that look like milk lakes. Ash from clean wood ground stone that once was mountain, a pinch of clay. So the lake and the bowl will be friends. A paddle stirs until the surface forgets to show dust. A woman holds a cup by its foot, dips it slowly, and waits until the coat of future glass stops climbing and makes its modest edge under the rim. She sets the cup on a board where drips collect in a polite line. Nearby, a jar full of copper turns the lake the color of moss after rain. Another with iron speaks of celadon green that remembers blue or gray depending on the day's manners. Labels are not needed. Hands read glaze by weight and by how the liquid leaves the fingertip. Quick 4 thin, slow 4 generous. Inside the kill, Saga's protective clay boxes build themselves into little streets. Each Saga shelters 1 or 2 vessels, keeping ash from writing its own ideas onto the glaze. Props hold shelves in a logic of triangles that even sleep would understand. A boy lays wads of refractory clay, soft coins that will lift a plate by 3 equal promises. His master nods without words. The boy smiles as someone smiles when a triangle begins to feel like a friend. At the arch, a potter brushes the door bricks with a slurry, so they will lift clean tomorrow. He places them one by one, a mouth closing gently. Firing is a grammar made of breath. Pine split stack by size. Thick to thin, the first sticks wait like good listeners. A tender folds paper, lays a twist under the smallest kindling, and offers a spark. The flame accepts and behaves. Draw begins at the mouth, creeps along the dragon's back, wakes each chamber in turn. Dampers lift a finger's width, then 2. The keeper of the cone's small witnesses that bend when truth arrives sets 1-4 begin, 1-4 nearly, 1-4 enough. The stoker's rhythm is patient, 2 sticks, then 3, a breath, a glance at the ark's color, the quiet orange that says we are on our way, the deeper tone that says let things speak, the soft white that says we have asked enough, now listen. Heat and time write a letter together and sign each other's names. While fire thinks, a room behind the kill hosts the com of brushes. A potter paints a slip line around a bowler cloud that does not need to look like a cloud to be one. Another flicks an iron brown leaf, just one, because a leaf alone can carry a season without growing lonely. A stamp with a workshop mark touches the foot, no words, just a small square. Square means from here, and seen. A board of spoons glows with nothing but possibility. A finger along their backs feels the thinness a good mouth appreciates. A kettle on a brick hearth mutters in favor of patience. Night comes without asking the kin's permission. The kill takes it kindly. Stars appear above the ridge, a breeze learns to step lightly. Stoke holes blink in their own small rhythm. The tender sleeve darkens where sweat and ash conspire, but his hands keep their fine work. He listens for the way flame licks a saga wall, not to be told a secret, only to know if the flame feels welcome. In the yard, a ledger receives dots. Fuel in, mouths opened, cones bent. Dots are better than numbers when the mind should be quiet. A cat finds the warmest brick and agrees with it. Porcelain asks for more discipline, less forgiveness. In the jiggering room, a mold turns on a wheel taught by water to be steady. A stick guides a ribbon of clay until a cup's wall is thinner than good paper and just as honest. Hands learn to press less rather than more. A worker lifts a cup by its foot, and for a moment it seems as if he is holding a piece of daybreak. He sets it down where drafts will not bully it. Porcelain punishes hurry. No one here intends to be punished. At dawn, enough has bent. Dampers lower their eyelids. The dragon breathes through a reed, not a horn. Calling is a ceremony without words. The door is brick still. The heat called a guest who needs a long goodbye. By afternoon, a brick leaves its place, then another. Warm scent mineral, and something like bread steps into the yard. A saga lifts, shows a bowl whose glaze has remembered to move and to stop. Where it pulled at the foot it is deeper. Where it climbed the rim it is thin as a thought. This is not perfection. It is temperate success. The yard agrees. Sorting is a kindness too. Firsts for the kill gods. Firsts for the court, if the court is asking kindly this season. Firsts for the road, if the road has been polite. Seconds for kitchens and tea houses that prefer honesty to flawless pride. A plate with a pinhole becomes a gift. A cup with a blush where iron rose to speak goes to the shelf near the door where friends find their favorite truths. A shard bin collects what should not travel. Shards are not shame here, they are study. Edges teach children not to rush. Glaze pools teach everyone moderation. In a tea house, a priver, a kettle with a small mouth, speaks in even syllables. A host warms a bowl, stirs ground tea with hot water until the surface remembers silk, and serves as if he were returning a borrowed book. Porcelain turns drink into light and heat into neighborliness. To travelers meet over bowls that reflect the window square. They talk about rope and weather and the pin on a cart wheel that decided to be sensible. They do not speak of war. The bowls would not enjoy it. Outside, a rain begins that sounds like someone touching a drum but deciding not to strike. Cups travel wrapped in oiled paper, nested like sleeping birds. Porters balance poles on shoulders padded with cloth that carries its own memory of weight. A pass receives a red square at the workshop and another at the post. The squares keep each other company without argument. Along a stretch of road where the wall shows its seam politely, a courier pauses to wet a strip of paper, for a cracked strap. Paper remembers its first life with water and agrees to be helpful. A beacon tower watches, unused and content. The kill rests for a day. Fireboxes are swept. Ash is sifted for glaze. Clean ash, not proud ash. The yard washes its boards and stands them to dry where wind won't make speeches. A boy mends a brush with thread and the patient knot that opens if it should. The master inspects a bowl in reflected light and sees the slight shadow where glaze pours to consider the rim. He smiles without praise or blame. Enough, he says, to no one in particular, to the day perhaps. The day seems to nod. If sleep arrives, let it. Clay will keep its promises. Glazes will keep their manners. Sagas will keep vessels from wearing the wrong stories. Props will keep triangles. Honest fire will keep its grammar. Cones will keep their small courage. Doors will keep their slow goodbye. Ledgers will keep dots instead of noise. Shards will keep lessons. Bowls will keep warmth. Cups will keep quiet light. Roads will keep distances softened by rest. Houses passes will keep their squares. The wall will keep the horizon's seam that no bowl needs to cross. Pocket pictures to carry. A dragon kill like a resting animal. Along a hill, a dipped cup with a modest unglazed ring under its lip. 3 cones leaning. The last one finally bowing. A door arch mortared with a brush so it will lift clean. A saga street with little props making patient triangles. A first bowl breathing warm mineral scent. A celadon pool deepening at the footer. Shard's bright edge teaching caution, without scolding a kettle's mouth, drawing even syllables to red squares on one pass. Friendly as neighbours. If sleep arrives, let it. Morning will find the kill cool, the yard swept, the boards dry, the glazed bowls stirred back to clarity, the moulds ready to turn, and the tea house honing its quiet heat, cup, hand, breath into something that feels like agreement. The 12th part. A city learns stillness when the exam days arrive. Streets that usually talk in cart songs and hawker calls soften to a low wool of footsteps. At the south gate, people flow through like a river, remembering to be shallow families with bundles of steamed buns and paper-wrapped pears, candidates with brushes rolled in cloth, inkstones wrapped in old silk, a short kettle that can be coaxed to boil on a little brazier without becoming a nuisance. Above the gate, a bell stands ready to count beginnings and endings with the voice of a considerate neighbour. Registration is a ceremony of small agreements. Under a striped awning, clerks sit in a row beside baskets of numbered tokens. A candidate presents his travel pass paper, tied around a sliver of wood, loop that opens and the clerk checks grain. A notch against the ledger's square of red. He compares the seal or a letter of recommendation to a simple mark pressed fresh. Match, he says without hurry. Then pushes forward a narrow tag of bamboo with a cord and a knot that will open without sulking. The candidate ties it to his sleeve, touches it once the way one touches a door ring when leaving home, and breathes in through the nose as if to set the lungs to the right measure. The exam compound looks from above like a field of tiny houses planted in ordered rows. Each cell is a booth of brick and tile, a plank for a desk, another plank that can become a bed, and a little shelf that keeps ink out of harm's way. Lanes run straight as good thought gutters carry away rain and doubt alike. Proctors walk with the gait of people who have learned patient circles. They carry rods not to threaten, but to lift fallen things back into place. The corner of a paper, the edge of a plank, a candidate's concentration if wind insists on talking at the wrong time. A brazier smokes lightly at the end of a lane. Warming water so tea can be arranged when noon decides to arrive. Inside a cell, a man opens his roll of brushes. He chooses one that has never made a fuss, the medium goat hair that stands when asked and yields when advised. He pours a spoon of water into the inkstone's hollow, then circles the inkstick with a touch that remembers winter pine. The pool turns from clear to smoke tonight with a mind of its own. He tests the brush on the stone's flat edge, one short line, one long, then breathes out. The brush takes the paper with no ambition. A title line settles. He's not here to woo, he's here to show that his hand and mind can keep good company. The bell speaks once, and the exam begins. Paper is handed through the slit of each cell by a clerk who moves as if balancing a thought across a stream. The topic is stated with the politeness of clear weather. No thunder will be entertained. Pens scratch in the register of soft rain on a tiled court. A boy in the next cell taps his knee twice and forgets to stop, then remembers and stops. The proctor's shadow passes, the tapping does not resume. From the kitchen shed, steam lifts in thin pennants. Rice and greens and a bit of pork are ladled into bowls that keep hands warm enough to remain useful. Outside the compound, families wait in a hush learned from temples. A mother unrolls a mat, sets 2 buns where her son will find them when the hour allows, and talks to the gate not for help, but for company. His ink is good, she explains to the wood. He practiced not to press too hard. The wood has been told many such things and continues its job being a gate that opens when asked and stands firm when it must. A money changer at a small table exchanges big coins for small, without sighing. People wish to buy tea 1 cup at a time today. The changer appreciates good reasons. Back in the cell, the candidate shapes his argument the way a mason shapes mortar, enough to bind, not enough to boast. He quotes what should be quoted and no more. He leans back to rest his hand, counts 3 breaths, looks at the angle of light on the shelf to guess the hour's location, then resumes. A fly intrudes, he waves it off with a smile that never becomes a grin. The brush goes on being a good citizen. His second page is better than the first. as stones fit better once the hands are warm. When time calls a pause, papers are gathered into a packet. Each sheet's corner receives a stitched thread passes through holes pricked by a pin, so that pages will hold one another without trying to be more than paper. A cordsman seals the packet with paste and presses a square that says "Seen." The name is copied elsewhere, in characters so plain that the copyist would be embarrassed to be praised for them. Plainness is the courtesy that stands closest to fairness. The packet joins others in a wicker chest that once carried plums, and plums would not be offended by the new cargo. Night folds over the rows. Lanterns with hoods keep light small and cooperative. Some candidates lie down and let sleep test the planks, others sit, knees up, and write quietly until the bell advises them to rest. Proctors exchange nods at the lane ends, their rods tucked under arms like walking sticks that forgot to become journeys. The kitchen banked its coals, the kettle keeps a warm tongue in the water. An old dog dozes under the bench beside a pile of bundled firewood, his dreams twitch in the rhythm of a child discovering a slope. The rain that began in afternoon has learned to end politely. Dawn leans into the compound and finds the last answers tying their conclusions. The bell speaks again. Papers breathe a little as they leave hands for the desk's return tray. People stretch necks and put away brushes. Water bowls empty into the courtyard drain that has been hoping to be useful since yesterday. The clerk ties two loops around each packet, one that opens and one that will not without a knife. The opening loop is for honesty, the closing loop is for custody. Both are needed when minds travel. Results do not arrive as thunder. They arrive as a board on trestles in a public square. Names written in a hand that laughs at flourishes. A sheet of paper is pasted to another when space proves modest. A boy reads aloud for those who set eyes aside long ago. Some applause appears in the sleeve. Not the palm pride prefers to travel without drums. A man whose name is not present tries the tea seller's kettle and discovers the temperature is exactly right for disappointment to cool without becoming bitter. The seller offers a slice of ginger not as charity, but as a fact about weather. The man accepts the fact. He will write again. The packets for the next exam stage begin their trip. A courier lays them in a chest that smells of cedar, then binds the lid, then slides the chest into a carrier that ties to a mule with a loop that opens. He presents a pass with two squares, the square of the exam and the square of the post, and receives a third from the gate, a small rectangle that will sit beside the squares without arguing. He starts before heat grows ambitious, on a stretch where the wall stands at a distance like a seam that mines the horizon. He hums the small tune that helps a path grow shorter. The mules seem not to mind. In a study across town, the night archivist straightens a stack of practice essays left by students who paid a coin for honest eyes. He reads an opening that overreaches, scratches one dot beside the first paragraph left and two dots beside a line that earns kindness. Keep this. He stamps a square on the back that means he has paid attention. He wraps the stack in paper, ties a loop, and places the bundle on a shelf marked only by a notch someone cut 50 years before he was born. Notches are reliable. He pours tea, sets the cup on a ring that remembers to spare wood, and allows himself a small smile at a metaphor that tried too hard. Even kindness enjoys accuracy. Evening puts the city into first positions. The gate learns quiet again. The awning is rolled. Families carry baskets home, some heavy with celebration, some exactly as heavy as when they arrived. The bell does not judge. It will count again when asked. A woman washes an inkstone and tips the last black into a plant pot. A boy in the courtyard practices characters with water on the stones, writing lines that shine for a moment and then rejoin their source. The strokes appear, decide not to become history, and vanish with impeccable manners. If sleep arrives, let it. The bell will keep beginnings and endings modest. The clerks will keep ledgers with squares that comb. The tokens will keep their notches. The cells will keep their planks that know when to be table and when to be bed. The brushes will keep the habit of arriving and then lifting away. The cord will keep one loop that opens and one that does not. The board will keep names without trumpets. The T will keep the temperature that makes acceptance possible. The road will keep its distances punctuated by houses that serve rice and hot water. The wall will keep the seam that gathers blue and earth into good order. Pocket pictures to carry. A sleeve tag of bamboo tied with a knot that opens a cell shelf holding an inkstone that keeps a small lake of night. A proctor's rod lifting the corner of a page that tried to fall. A brazier murnering under a kettle with a careful mouth. A packet stitched at the corner and sealed with a square results board standing on trestles like a well-behaved guest. A teacup with a sliver of ginger floating like a karma. A chest in cedar with 3 squares of agreement. A studies ring that spares a tabletop from heat. Water characters on courtyard stone fading without regret. If sleep arrives, let it. Morning will find the compound swept, the brushes dried to honest points, the bell rested and ready, the night archivist stamped clean, and a new set of hands unrolling cloth to lay out their tools without hurry. The 13th part. Water learns duty one lock at a time. At dawn the canal holds the colour of unpolished jade. Barges sit shoulder to shoulder like animals that understand each other. A lockkeeper walks along the whetstone with a pole that measures more by habit than by marks. He checks the wooden gates, strokes a hinge with oil, and ties back a rope whose loop opens without argument. When he lifts the paddle to let water speak, the current answers in syllables as even as counting beads, and the barge rises the width of a palm. No one applauds. Distance is being folded. That is enough. Grain moves the way sleep does without hurry when the house is wise. At a riverside granary, doors stand high above the ground, so vermin must learn patience and then give up. Inside, bins are lined with lime-washed brick. The scent is clean and undecorated. Labourers carry sacks from the quay in a relay that makes a simple rhyme. Shoulder, ladder, landing, shoulder, ladder, landing. A clerk waits at the sill with a beam scale, a stone pans on one side, a standard weight on the other, and a brass rider that knows only fair positions. He slides the rider until the arm remembers level, then lays a small stick on the sack. 1 stick 4 measured, 2 4 stacked, 3 4 sealed. Sticks are kinder than chalk when grain brushes by. Sealing is a ceremony with soft hands. A cordsman ties a mouth with a twist and a loop that opens. He presses a clay buller over the knot and lifts a seal stone from a bowl of clear water. The square it leaves says only that someone paid attention. A second square arrives from a different hand. The two sit together like sensible neighbors. A child watching from the doorway understands without lessons. 2 squares make mischief tired. On the quay, a scribbler marks a tally board with notches you could count in the dark. The notches remember when ink must not. Barges accept the weights with a slow bow. Planks are laid like sentences made to be believed. Pegs are tapped until they stop commuting between almost and yes. A skipper walks the deck barefoot to hear the wood's opinion. Mooring rings set into stone receive ropes padded with felt to spare the fibers patience. A small bell at the bow says ready in a voice that never scolds. When the lock opens, the barge noses through as if entering a familiar room. Along the towpath, men and mules become a single, polite machine. The line runs from a tow post at the bow to a harness that does not bite. A boy minding the slack keeps the rope from learning bad habits. Where the path curves under a willow, he lays the line into a carved stone groove that spares bark and rope both. The willows hang their green curtains and let the procession pass without performing. On the far bank, a tea shed remembers all the names it has never asked for. A kettle with a sensible mouth agrees to steam bowls, except being warm before being helpful. Bridges step over the water with stone feet that know how to spread weight. At a humpback bridge, a barge takes down its mast and lays it gently into a cradle. A ferryman touches the door ring of a shrine stone for luck and, lacking coins, offers a well-tied knot instead. On the parapet a mason smooths a coping with a tool that has lived in his hand for decades. He taps a thin shim under a loose stone until the surface stops whispering about it. A swallow rehearses a turn beneath the arch and teaches the air to listen. Where the canal meets a river that pretends to be difficult, A system of stakes marks a channel with a grammar of modest intent. Tall stakes, stay close, but not too close. Low stakes, shoal nearby that would rather be left alone. At the confluence, a ring sits halfway down a stone pier, a rope rests there while a barge minds the way to currents, like to push and pull. A ferryman in a small skiff guides the bow with a pole no longer than a promise. He wears shoes that like to be wet, and a hat that respects rain from a distance. Water also travels upward, if given the right tools. In a field beyond the lock, a chain pump lifts canal water into a channel that runs down a row of beans. To men tread the pedals in turn, not to prove anything, only to lean their day toward evening with fewer complaints. The wooden paddles climb the box like well-raised children. A boy walks ahead and plugs side spouts with handfuls of grass where soil is satisfied. He opens others where the earth asks. His mother tests the edge of a terrace with her foot and nods, pleased that the wall built without mortar still prefers to stand. At a salt yard a day's walk away, flats shine as if the sky had decided to lie down and think. Shallow pans wait for wind and patience to take turns. A worker scrapes a line and leaves a white ridge that looks like a folded sleeve. He fills small baskets that drip for an hour, then tip over a drying mat. A clerk checks a standard gourd measure against a notch on a beam and smiles, because agreement is a warm coat even in hot weather. A buller keeps the cord from pretending to forget its job. On the canal, salt travels upstream, the way news travels in a house that values quiet. Granary fans move the stored air without making a spectacle. A wheel with wide paddles turns by hand. A man counts 30 and rests, counts 30 and rests again. Grain gives a little sigh and resigns itself to living well. A woman at the threshold lifts a scoop and finds that 2 scoops make a bowl that will cook politely. She sets aside a handful for birds, because birds are not wrong often enough to matter. A cat comes to the door and doesn't enter. Cats know doors. In a city square, a tax office accepts what the water delivered. Weights are checked where light is good. A man with a ledger presses a square when scale and sack agree, another square when the seal is unbroken, a third when destination is named but not bellowed. The clerk lays the ledger flat and puts a ring under the inkstone so the table will not become less than itself. A child watches a spinner of straw twist cords that will become loops that open. The child practices one loop and is surprised to find the knot more willing than expected. Night takes its place along the water as lanterns fold the edges of things. A lockkeeper sets his pole on pegs and feels the small forgiveness of work finished honestly. The last bell of the market keeps time for boats that will start before the courtyard stretch. On a barge deck, a skipper covers the hatch with oiled cloth and lies down where he can hear the change, the water's thought. He, too, prefers loops that open, weights that match, seals that mean seen, and banks that do not hurry to seal their opinions into stone. If sleep arrives, let it. Locks will keep their measured voices, gates will keep their hinges, oiled rings will keep rope from learning impatience, tow lines will keep their manners, stakes will keep a channel's grammar, chain pumps will keep their small steps. Towards sky terraces will keep their dry-laid kindness, pans will keep the sky's salt with modest pride, fans will keep the grain from growing lonely, scales will keep their level squares, will keep their honesty, ledgers will keep their quiet. The canal will keep its long sentence that folds distance without raising it. Pocket pictures to carry. A lock gate lifting a paddle, just enough. A beam scales rider sliding to the complace. A clay ball, a drinking a seal square and smiling red. A rope laid into a carved stone groove under a willow. Humpback bridge with a mast laid into its cradle, stakes into heights, writing a channel in plain language. A chain pumps paddles, climbing like polite stairs. A drying mat with small salt baskets, tipping out their day. A granary fan, turning 30, then resting. A child's first loop, not holding because it was invited, not forced. If sleep arrives, let it. Morning will find the lockkeeper awake before the fish, the towpath soft from dew. The granary doors cool to the palm, the weights agreeing with themselves, and the first barge sliding forward as quietly as a page turned by someone with no cause to rush. The 14th part. Paper begins as patience in water. In a courtyard behind a low eave, A trough holds bark softened to the color of tea with milk, mulberry bast and hemp. Rags that surrendered pride long ago. To men raise wooden mallets and let them fall in a rhythm that does not need to prove itself. Fibers loosen to threads finer than a whisper. A woman lifts a handful, squeezes, and watches the drip when the drip tells her not yet lumps, not yet clouds. She nods and tips the mass back into the vat. A scoop of lime water persuades the mix toward kindness. Nothing hurries. Water remembers how. The vat is a library of moments. A paper maker takes the mold frame and screen dips, lifts, and shakes side to side, then front to back, teaching fibers to agree. The slurry falls away. What remains is a sheet that has not learned it is a sheet. He tips the mold, kisses it to a felt blanket, and leaves the newborn page sleeping face down. Stack follows stack, felt, sheet, a quiet sandwich of repetition. When the stack is tall as a forearm, a screw press lowers its wooden head, and water tells its long story in a low voice until it decides to be gone. Walls are good at making paper decide. Inside a warm room, sheets leave the felt one by one and climb a plastered wall in neat, overlapping scales. Heat from a hearth walks behind that wall. The plaster knows how to share. A brush smooths each sheet flat. A hand walks air bubbles toward the edge and then lets them go. Dry, the sheets leave the wall as if parting from an old friend. No tugging, just two agreements reaching their end. A boy carries them to a bench where a woman sizes them with a thin glue and alum. So ink will arrive and then stop with dignity. A smooth stone burnishes the surface until a fingertip says yes. Ink is night made polite. Pine, soot, glue, a breath of musk knead together under a hand that knows how to press and fold without forcing. The paste settles into a mold and sleeps until it becomes an ink stick black that holds light the way a pond holds sky. A student waits an inkstone with a spoon, circles the stick, and listens for the silk of good grinding. The pool darkens like evening finding a courtyard. He draws a test line, thin, then another, thick, and warms the brush with a little smile meant only for the brush. Blocks of wood that learn to speak and then learn to be humble about it. A carver pastes a thin page face down on perwood, so the characters will read the right way when the block is inked. He waits until the paste admits friendship, then the knives begin. The V-gouge, the knife with a tip like a small leaf. The chisel that wants only to be square, each has a job. White areas fall away, strokes remain, proud by being low. He cuts registration notches into the corner fence to small rests that will tell the paper where to begin and where to sit. He oils the block lightly, not to shine, only to keep weather from being too forward. Printing is breathing in, breathing out. The printer brushes a thin skin of ink onto the block. No puddles, no dryness, just the way tea likes a cup. He lays a sheet by the corner rests, lowers it as if putting a child to bed, and rubs the back with a palm pad until the paper agrees to receive the wood's suggestion. He lifts the sheet from one corner, no drama, and hangs it on a cord. One print, then another. The cord learns to be a gallery that says nothing. Outside, rain considers arriving and decides to postpone itself. Bindings are promises made in thread. Sheets fold at the spine, gather into nests, and receive 4 holes punched with an awl that prefers to be quiet. Linen thread passes through, corner, near, far, and return a square knot ties the line into modest forever. A blue cover takes its position. A small label waits blank in the corner. No words yet, only room for them. A press of the palm smooths the stack. The book lays on the table like a guest who already knows where cups and bowls live. In a room with windows that face a pear tree, the night archivist hosts a small ceremony of attention. He sets a brush rest shaped like a mountain, fills a water dropper, and places a paperweight of river stone wrapped in old silk on the first page, so the air will not rearrange the line. He writes a comment in a hand that refuses to show off. To characters to approve restraint, one to ask for a sentence that knows when to end. His square stamp joins them, red as a thoughtful plum. Square means seen, red means seen kindly. Books travel folded into the day. 10 volumes make a bundle wrapped in oiled paper, tied with a loop that opens. The seller adds a small clay buller impressed with his shop square, and hands the bundle to a porter whose shoulder cloth remembers this shape. A pass receives the square of the shop, and, at the post, a second square that minds the road. A boy at the threshold tucks a sprig of bamboo under the tie for luck. No one objects to luck if it behaves. On a canal slope, between cradle and market, the porter pauses at a tea stall that knows how to mind books. The stall's benches dry the cups, around in the mouth the kettle tells the right truth at the right heat. A string from the eave holds messages stitched on scraps, a drawing of a carp with exaggerated whiskers, a leaf pressed flat, and thinner child's careful circles striving to be moons. The porter sips, looks at the bundle, looks at the river, nods to his own day, and walks on. In a workshop downriver, a woodblock lies under sheets that dry like fish scales. The printer tests a new pigmencello that thinks of autumn ginkgo and decides it should be a whisper, not a word. He wipes the block with a cloth that knows both ink and water and can be patient with both. A fan moves air without arguing with the paper. Outside the door, the alley practices small economies. A ring set into a wall saves a rope from being stepped on. A stone under a barrel keeps the base from learning dampness. A cat learns that shadows change their minds very slowly here. Even the wall, far off, keeps a page's edge. On an evening walk, the porter looks up and sees the seam along the hills, a quiet line like the margin of a folio. Beyond it, wind practices sentences he will not need to read. The seam and the page agree. Edges help meaning settle, they do not scold or show off. He adjusts the bundle, feels its promising weight, and returns to streets that prefer to be narrow at night. A scholar opens a fresh book, inks a brush, and copies a recipe for making glue that does not yellow paper. He turns the brush sideways to make a dry stroke that looks like old bark, then forward again to write one character that means enough. He blows gently. The stroke holds, dark without shouting. He closes the book and sets it under a paperweight that remembers rivers. Outside, a bell far away counts an hour that has no sharp edges. If sleep arrives, let it. Bats will keep their pale clouds molds, will keep their patient shakes felts, will keep their alternating kindness walls, will keep their warm hands sizing, will keep ink from wandering burnished stones, will keep their quiet shine ink. Sticks will keep night ready to become council blocks, will keep their low relief corner fences, will keep sheets where they belong threads, will keep promises at 4-hole stamps, will keep squares red and modest chords will keep. Loops that open passes will keep their agreements, the far seam will keep margin for the sky. Your place will be beside a table, where a brush dries to a good point and paper waits without anxiety. Pocket pictures to carry. A sheet sleeping on felt, under a wooden press a plaster wall scaled with drying pages, a burnished stone walking light across a sheet, an ink stick circling an inkstone, until the pool remembers evening. A block's corner fence with 2 tiny rests, a palm pad rubbing a printer wake, a blue cover with 4 comb stitches, a red square or a title page, like a helpful plum, a bundle tied with a loop, and a bamboo sprig, a river stone in silk, holding a page in agreement with the room. If sleep arrives, let it. Morning will find the vat skimmed and clear, the press rested, the wool warm, the blocks oiled just enough, the cords ready to open, and the first reader leaning over the table to begin a paragraph that knows how to finish. The 15th part. Mulberry keeps time with hands. In a low valley where mornings learn to be mild, rows of mulberry trees hold leaves like quiet plates. Women move along the rows with baskets looped over the arm, picking the freshest no-gloss, tender midrib, the kind that agrees with small jaws. Leaves fall into the basket with a soft, confident sound. At the shed, a mat is wiped with a damp cloth, and the leaves spread into a green that looks like patience made visible. Silkworms are not in a hurry, which is their genius. On trays of woven bamboo, pale bodies lift their heads just enough to approve the leaf, and then lower themselves back into work. Their chewing is a kind of rain that forgot to announce itself. A child learns to listen for the one sound that means to dry and mists the air with a sprayer made from a gourd and the clever reed valve. Another child switches trays so that older mouths keep to older leaves and younger mouths are not asked to be brave. The room is warm because silk prefers fairness, and warmth is a fairness of its own kind. When silk says now, it says it with thread. The caterpillars move to twig frames and begin to write ovals in the air, a wandering that narrows into a promise, then closes. Cocoons heap in a basket like moons with their pride removed. Boiling is an act of care. A pot accepts a handful at a time. The water holds a near simmer, and a woman with a brush of broomcorn teases for the end of one filament. The filament finds her, and she smiles, but does not celebrate. The thread is nearly invisible and the moment prefers modesty. She gathers 4 or 5 ends together, lays them over a guide, and the reel begins. The reeling frame is a bicycle 4 hands. A wheel turns by a band, a guide arm winds a figure 8 that teaches threads to share strain. A dish of soap water combs bubbles. The filaments find each other, decide not to quarrel, and become a single voice. When a strand breaks, the reeler dips her brush and invites another end with the same patience used on the first. A boy counts revolutions with a string of seeds sliding across a cordon. Seed each 100 turns and tips a seed into a bowl. When it reaches the knot, the bowl does not keep score, it remembers rhythm. Twist makes strength without boasting. Skeins leave the reel, pass through a little box that spins them against themselves, unlearn to live as pairs. A woman loops each finished skein over a peg and writes a red square near the knot with a thumb dipped in paste. The square means seen, and also this one is not lost. A ledger at the window keeps dots 4 skeins delivered, dots 4 skeins reserved for die, and dots 4 tea consumed. Dots are a language that forgives interruptions. Die takes a day's manners from the sky. In a courtyard, vats crouch like old friends. Indigo breathes under a cap of foam madder. Simmers the color of late leaves, safflower thinks of dawn. A dyer tests a vat with a stick. The stick leaves darker than it entered, without pretending to be clever. Skeins slip in, and then rise. Indigo is mean in the vat, and kind in air. Green at first, then blue as it makes its peace with oxygen. A woman hangs the skeins from a bamboo pole and walks the length of the courtyard, so the strands will comb themselves into parallel. She hums a tune with no middle, only beginnings and endings that mirror each other. Warp and weft are agreements written with wood. In the loom room, a warp beam rests like a patient drum. A warper walks backward with a cross of threads held between the fingers, counting without speaking 12, then another 12, then a breath. The cross goes onto the least sticks, so each thread will remember where to go. Heddle string eyes hang from the shafts. A drawloom's pattern harness waits behind, cords gathered into loops that open because they must. A boy learns to lift the correct bundle when the weaver knots. He errs once, then not again. The loom forgives quickly when you treat it as a teacher. The shuttle talks with the reed. Weft slides through the shed. The reed beats light, not hard like closing a sliding screen with courtesy. Pattern emerges the way frost does, at the pace of attention. A small mistake becomes a secret fixed 3 picks later. A larger mistake becomes a short rest, a sip of tea, and an unweaving that teaches calm more than pride ever could. The weaver wears soft shoes and keeps a paper bundle of spare weft under the bench. A ring screwed into the loom's frame saves scissors from slipping to the floor. The ring, like all good rings, wishes to spare both tool and floor from learning impatience. Drawloom patterns are conversations with cord. The pattern reader calls, not aloud, with a touch, and the draw boy lifts a set of loops that coax the harness into a new truth. Flowers appear where threads decide to be neighbors. For a while cranes walk across a border at a measured step. A cloud repeats without persuading itself to change. The cloth grows with the steadiness of a canal filling a lock. The top cloth rolls, the undercloth rolls, and the weaver's feet learn a vowel of treadles that the loom keeps no ledger for, only the body does. When a bolt reaches the measure arm span plus the hands, again and again, until a wooden hook agrees, the weaver smiles at the mere adequacy of it. Cutting and finishing ask no applause. The bolt is carried to a table that has learned flatness honestly over many years. A brush with the stiffness of a practical cousin. Any lint, a paste of plant starch, persuades the cloth to keep its edges from making new ideas on their own. In the market, the bolt receives a small cord around its middle tied in a loop that opens, and a square seal from the guild that tries not to be proud. The seller sets the bolt where brows will meet it calmly. People touch, not to be convinced, but to be introduced, hand to silk, silk to hand. Introductions done well become friendships quickly. Cloth travels like water when roads mind their work. A porter uses a bamboo shoulder pole with a pad thick enough to remember him to bolts to a side balance. He presents a road pass at the post, 1 square from the guild, 1 square from the dye shop, and a new square from the post official, all sitting together without argument. On a rise in the road, the great wall shows its seam like a margin on a book. The porter does not think of borders as endings, only as edges where tools change hands. A tea shed under a poplar offers bowls and shade and news that has already learned to be careful. In a small house, a bride's chest opens like a chapter. A mother lifts a garment sewn from last year's bolt pattern birds across the hem and checks the seams by running a finger along them, counting stitches by muscle memory. She adds a sachet with dried orange peel and a little tea to keep moths from enjoying too much. A red thread is looped through a buttonhole, then tied in a knot that opens, because some knots should. A child tries the button, unloops it with delight, and is told gently that delight is not a schedule. She agrees, at least for now. Silk also lives modestly thicker in winter, lighter in summer, padded when cold, has more to say than it ought, gauzy when heat insists on being heard. A tailor squares a corner with a wooden set square rubbed smooth by decades. The square could stamp a page, but here it constrains a sleeve with the same kindness. Scene agreed. 2 pins are enough when cloth and hands are acquainted. The tailor's cat ignores all of this and sleeps on a folded scrap that will later become a collar. Cats understand generosity by lying on it. Night finds the loom defended only by quiet. The draw cords hang like unspoken sentences. The shuttle waits in the cradle with a loop around its waist to keep it from roaming. A cup on the bench has a ring under it to spare the wood. A paper with a small red square lies on the window sill. Delivery tomorrow at second bell. Somewhere upriver, a dragging kill breathes slowly somewhere downriver. A printer rubs a page awake on the distant scene. Beacon bundles keep dry. Work rests in a way that invites sleep to do the same. If sleep arrives, let it. Mulberry will keep its leaves honest baskets, will keep their curved steam, will keep its polite urgency brushes, will keep finding filaments reels, will keep their figure-eight reasonableness skeins, will keep their twist vats will keep their temper warps, will keep their order heddles, will keep their I draw cords, will keep their promises reeds, will keep their measured persuasion bolts, will keep their quiet shine passes, will keep their squares in neighborly company loops, will keep opening when asked. Your place will be a bench beside a loom that knows your feet and a window that knows your light. Pocket pictures to carry. A silkworm lifting its head once before returning to work. A broomcorn brush cupping invisible thread from a steaming pot. A reeler's seed counter sliding 1 bead to a bowl. A skein hung to drip indigo back to itself. Lee sticks crossed like chopsticks sternly at rest. A shuttle gliding between threads that behave. A drawboy's hand lifting loops into pattern without noise. A bolt on a table with 2 pins and a square set to the corner. A gilt seal pressed modestly red. A road pass with 3 squares sitting together. A bride's chest smelling of orange peel and patience. If sleep arrives, let it. Morning will find mulberry leaves wet with dew, trays clean, filaments willing, indigo breathing kindly, treadles remembering their vowels, and a length of cloth ready to become usefulness without asking for applause. The 16th part. A house is a promise made with wood and air. In a yard the size of a patient breath, a carpenter snaps a chalk line across a beam, blue dust floating for a heartbeat before deciding to settle. He checks the line with a plumb bob whose cord knows how to be still. The bob touches the beam and declares the world vertical enough. Ink lines follow thin, certain drawn with a bamboo marker dipped in a tray that refuses to spill. Mortise and tenon appear first as drawings, then as small hollows of trust and tongues that fit because hands remember. Wood speaks in seasons. Pillars stand on stone shoes that keep their feet from learning dampness. A young man brushes the stone with water and lays down a circle of oiled paper so the pillar will not quarrel with the shoe. He lowers the cedar into place with a rope sling tied in a loop that opens when asked. To men watch the grain, looking for a quiet face that will be kind to wait. They nod, and the loop lets go. A wedge persuades the base to a final whisper of alignment. No one claps. The pillar simply agrees to be a pillar. Above, brackets grow like wooden flowers. Blocks and arms, the dough and the gong stack into a patient geometry that teaches weight to change its mind without falling. A master lays one bracket on the ground as a lesson. Each piece marked with ink numbers, no grand names, just positions that satisfy each other. He taps a peony-headed mallet, once where wood needs to listen, twice where it already knows. The beam that will carry the eave rests on the bracket with the grace of a bowl finding its ring on a table. Nothing bites, everything sits. Walls are not where the house proves itself. Earth is tamped into panels, where the wind would be rude elsewhere. Lattice fill with paper that lets light in and opinion out. A mason lifts rammed earth in thin layers, a rhythm of tamp. Lift, tamp, lift until the wall hums like a drum, held at a respectful distance. A woman pastes new paper onto a window, her brush laying a bead of starch that dries to clarity. She smooths air toward the edge and waits for the sheet to decide it is part of the frame. A child peers through and laughs when the world becomes kind and soft. Roof tiles are coins for the sky. Down the lane, tile makers slap clay into semicircle molds, trim the edges with a tool that looks as if it were made by a practical ant, and lay the tiles on boards to dry under reed mats. When the kin speak of readiness, tiles fire until they remember to ring when tapped. Back at the house, men hand tiles up along a ladder where every rung knows the number of boots that have trusted it. Pond tiles settle, then cover tiles ride their backs ridges, receive end cap stamped with a small square from the yard. The first whisper of rain will find these channels unlearn manners. Inside the courtyard, air is the quiet engineer. The well stands where shadow will favor its summer mood, and a rain chain hangs from the eave where spring storms prefer to practice. At noon, the eave throws a rectangle on the floor. By late afternoon, it has slid politely to the opposite wall. A woman lays out apricots to dry along that moving edge, turning each when the sun says it is time. A potted pine teaches patience by being a tree that remembers cliffs, a basin with a carp remembers water by being water. A cat sleeps on a lintel that stores a hand's warmth longer than the day deserves. Doors prefer rings to knobs because rings ask less of wrists. A brass ring waits on a lion's head, it looks fierce for fun and gentle in use. A porter arrives with a bolt of cloth and lifts the ring once the knock carries, like a small drum learning to be polite. The house's old aunt opens and nods. She reads his pass without reading, 3 squares stamped where they should be and points to the shade where goods rest before talk begins. Tea appears because the house wishes to remember itself. Floors do not need to be loud to be useful. Planks lie with their hearts turned alike, so they will move in concert when seasons argue. A small wedge lives under a stool leg, so that no leg learns superiority. Mats weave their rice straw order into rooms, used by patients in winter. A brazier sits on a low table with a ring under its copper belly to spare the lacquer. Embers think long thoughts. A boy warms his hands and practices characters with water on the paving stones. Each character glows, then gives itself back. He does not mind being reminded that everything agrees to leave in time. Thresholds make friends with habits. Stepping over, a guest learns to lower voice and lift foot, to enter not with conquest, but with cooperation. A scroll in the hall shows bamboo painted with the dry brush that knows bark beneath. A broom leans with its bristles off the floor, so they will keep their honor. Shoes wait in an arc that shows how many went to market and how many stayed to consider small repairs. Hooks along a beam hold baskets whose loops remember which hand prefers which reach. A child climbs on a stall to hang her own small basket with her own small loop. It swings once and agrees to belong. In the carpenter's shop behind the house, blades live in a rack that counts life with nicks, each sharpened out until the steel remembers its purpose. A plane slides along a beam, whispering shavings that curl like karmas left on the floor to cool. The carpenter holds a square against a post and smiles at the way 90 degrees, refuses to be dramatic. He blackens a line with ink where a tenon must end, then saws without letting the saw explain too much. A dowel knocks home, a peg becomes a moral. He writes a tiny mark that the joint ascribes character meaning only this neat, that then rubs it with the oil on his thumb, so time will need to work harder to forget it. Sound measures the city when night arrives. From the corner tower, a drum says which watch has taken its place, not to command, only to let doors and dreams agree. A watchman taps a clapper. While walking the alley outside the courtyard wall, the rhythm says all is ordinary. The bell at the south gate rehearses tomorrow's dawn by staying silent now. On the far seam of the hills, beacon stacks stand dry and bored, which is what everyone wants of them tonight. The house breathes under its tiles, which is what it wants of itself every night. Craft is a teacher that never raises its voice. In the kitchen, a clay stove keeps 3 circles, one for soup that prefers a whisper, one for rice that likes to be spoken to steadily, one for a kettle that knows its work. Lids twitch when they must unstop when asked. A cook uses a weight to hold down a fermenting jar's cloth. The weight is a stone from a river that decided long ago to know roundness. The ladle hangs from a ring so that its bowl forgets to touch the floor. A sieve dries by the window where the breeze knows which side of the mesh prefers to be patient. Festivals arrive by walking, not by surprise. At New Year, paper cutouts lean against window paper fish that wish plenty coins that behave by being square within round. A string of firecrackers waits politely in a jar that won't mind charcoal dust afterward. A parent shows a child how to paste a spring couplet straight. The child holds one edge, the parent the other, and together they lift the red strip into alignment. When the paste grips, they press, not too much, and stand back to appreciate straightness, the way neighbors appreciate quiet. Repairs keep a house honest. After a rain, a man climbs to the eave with a small bundle of tile wedges and a brush to sweep away proud leaves. He finds one gutter that forgot to remember slope, persuades it with a shim, and watches water nod and move on. At a corner post, he rubs oil into a crack the wood drinks and combs. He tightens a rope that keeps a sapling aligned against its stake. Checking the knot that opens to tie it is a kind of forgetting. On the ground, a girl collects dropped nails into a bowl and likes the sound they make, a small metal rain. She will sort them by size because sorting is a form of respect that doesn't need clapping. Trade threads through the neighborhood in a low voice. The brush shop next door sharpens nibs and sells inkstones that have learned smoothness from years of being asked kindly. Across from it, a pot repairer fits a butterfly-shaped copper patch across a crack, peening rivets flat until they agree to be background. He presses a red square beside his work, a tiny pledge that the pot will keep being a pot. The tea shop keeps a ledger with dots, one for each bowl poured, one for each loaned coin returned by evening, so that numbers will not accumulate the noise of pride. A ring at the doorway saves the curtain cord from the habits of a busy foot. At dusk, the night archivist visits. Because houses are part of his collection, he runs a hand along the bracket shadows, checks a joint for movement that would mean impatience, and taps a tile once to hear if rain left it content. He looks at the door ring and the ware polished by 3 generations' hands. He writes 2 small characters on his paper, seen sound. He stamps a red square that is less a seal than a courtesy. Before leaving, he picks up a child's water brush from the paving stones and leans it bristles up in a jar. Kindness toward small tools is a way of keeping history from needing to raise its voice. The house sleeps by procedure, not by command. The brazier ashes spread, so it will not sulk in the morning. The gate bar slides into its notch with a wooden sigh that means enough. The cat chooses the bench near the kitchen because the clay stove gives off a memory of warmth. Long after work stops, somewhere in the hills, Wind finds the wall's seam and combs it without snagging. The eave edge writes a thin line against the sky, and the sky accepts the signature. No one narrates this out loud. That is why it works. If sleep arrives, let it. Pillars will keep their shoes dry, brackets will keep their reasonable flowers, tenons will keep their promises, tiles will keep rain polite lattice, will keep light gentle rings, will keep from biting mats, will keep rooms from remembering cold to quickly shims, will keep water humble knots, will keep opening, when asked ledgers will keep dots, instead of drama bells, and drums will keep time without requiring attention, the seam on the horizon will keep its margin for everyone who prefers sense to spectacle. Your place will be under an eave that knows when to shade and when to listen. Pocket pictures to carry. A chalk line twang blue across a beam, a plumb bob's weight discovering stillness in midair, a bracket set laid out like nested hands, a window paper smoothed with starch until air leaves by the edges, a toll ringing once when tapped, a rain chain beading an evening shower into polite syllables, a door ring polished where three fingers always meet it, a boy's water characters evaporating back to their source, a copper butterfly patch calm on a pot's flank, a stamped square red beside to characters that simply say scene sound. If sleep arrives, let it. Morning will find the beam lines dry, the tile edge clean, the threshold swept, the brazier ready to try again, the child's brush soft and willing, and the house entirely itself, without demanding that anyone mention it.